Good evening. Call to order the January 24th Finance Facilities Committee meeting. First item of business is an announcement of live streaming. Just a note for all those in the audience, the meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. Moving on to new business, item 2.01, annual financial statements for the year ended June 30, 2022. Mr. Longwell.
Thank you, Mr. Stanker. This evening, a representative of Boyer and Ritter is here to present the financial statements and the audit. Z is, I think, by yourself, right, Z? So Z is here. Before we get really underway with the financial statements and as Z comes up and gets settled in here, I just wanted to mention and appreciation for Bobby Ely as she's come on board here this last fiscal year. And so you'll probably hear her name a couple times tonight as we have several agenda items pertaining to finance, but demonstrated an incredible expertise. And I think the support she provides, not only the finance team, but also the larger administration and our buildings. She's done a great job in a very short period of time. And so I think that's reflective as part of the audit process, but also some of the other conversations that are on the docket for either the finance committee here or the work session to come. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Z and let him work his magic.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rich. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sanahid Zahirovich. As Greg said, I go by Z. I'm a principal at Boyer and Ritter. Ultimately, the individual responsible from our firm's perspective for the audit of the district. So thank you for having me here. Try to be brief. I know you got a lot on the agenda. This thing's about 80 pages. We're going to skip a few of those, make sure we get through it pretty quickly here. If I start talking too fast, just let me know. So I'm going to start here, move right past the table of contents to, doesn't have a page number on it, but essentially it's page 1. And this is one of 3 audit opinions that Boyer and Ritter provides for the audit each year. This one is relating to the audit of the financial statements. The other 2 are relating to the compliance audit or the single audit that we do. For those that might recall what this report used to look like, you'll notice that it's undergone some changes. We added some wording. By they, I mean the standard body that we have to abide by when we issue a report such as this. So they added some wording, they moved some things around. First and foremost, now in this report is the opinions paragraph. And what that basically states is that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects. Goes on to say a few other things, but essentially this is an unmodified opinion, a clean opinion, one you would expect to see for the financial report. Paragraph after that is the basis for opinion. So here we state that we conducted our audit in accordance with the auditing standards generally accepted in the U.S., as well as the government auditing standards. We also note that we are independent of the district and that we met our ethical responsibilities in completing the audit. Emphasis of matter is next. This isn't a every year thing, but it might be with how often the Governmental Accounting Standards Board issues pronouncements. So this one alludes to GASB number 87 on leases. This required the management team to reevaluate certain contracts, basically the contracts such as copying machines that are throughout the district, so or any other contracts where the district either pays or receives rental type payments over a multi-year arrangement to determine if there's a right of use asset and a corresponding liability that needs to be added to the books. So that's something new this year. I'll touch on that a couple more times as we go through this. Second page then, we talk about the responsibilities of management, which is for the preparation of the financial statements. And then we have the rest of that page is the auditor's responsibility, which is, our objective is to obtain reasonable assurance over the financial statements and provide an opinion. Now, reasonable assurance is not absolute assurance. It is a high level, but it is not absolute. The rest of the page kind of goes on to talk about how in performing our audit, we have to comply with the relevant standards. Some of those bullet points identify what that entails. Third page of the opinion, required supplementary information. We talk about the management's discussion and analysis. I think that's a key area of the financial report for you to look over if you're short on time. RSI also includes the general fund budget towards the back half or near the end of the report here, as well as the pension and NOPEB schedules included. Supplementary information, then we talk about the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. I'll point that out as we get towards the back of the report. And then we talk about, last paragraph there, reporting required by government auditing standards. That really alludes to the second of the three opinions that we issue. So I'm going to skip actually to that report here. If you go all the way back to page 72, is where I'm heading next. So with this one, there really weren't any significant changes compared to the first one I just covered. As you can see in the title of the report, this one covers internal control of financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on our audit of the financial statements in accordance with those government auditing standards I mentioned previously. Big section here, report on internal control over financial reporting. So we have to consider internal controls over financial reporting when we conduct audit, and to design our auditing procedures. So that's what we're describing here. We define what deficiency in internal controls look like, what significant deficiencies and material weaknesses look like as well. Last paragraph, we note that during the audit, we did not identify any deficiencies that were considered to be material weaknesses. We're only required to disclose material weaknesses here, but I can tell you we didn't identify any significant deficiencies or internal control deficiencies. Next page, there's a paragraph at the top here, which is a report on the compliance and other matters. And we do note here that we disclose an instance of non-compliance that is required to be reported here in accordance with the government auditing standards. And that's described more in this accompanying schedule, which we'll get to here shortly. So you can see the other two paragraphs included here as well. And moving on to the next page, we get to the last of the three audit reports that we issue. And this one underwent a little bit of a change as well in formatting and wording included. Now this report is specific to the major federal programs selected for testing during our compliance audit or single audit phase of the overall audit. And this year we tested the Education Stabilization Funds, also known as the COVID Relief Funds, which accounted for about 1.1 million in federal expenditures this past year, and also the Child Nutrition Cluster, which accounted for about 2.9 million in federal expenditures. Again, first area of this report is the opinion on each major federal program, and we state that the district has complied in all material respects with those compliance requirements that we have to test in relation to both of those federal programs. Again, unmodified or clean opinion for the district. Then we talk about the basis for the opinion. Once again, we talk about the auditing standards generally accepted in the U.S., the government auditing standards. Then we add a third layer called uniform guidance. So when we do testing of these major federal programs, we're looking at three different requirements that have to be followed. And again, responsibilities of management for compliance. Second page, again, auditor's responsibility. There's that reasonable assurance referenced again. And then the other matters towards the bottom, identifying the instance of non-compliance, as well as the last paragraph there noting that the district is responsible for preparing a corrective action plan to address that finding, which it has, and that's included in the reporting package as well, which I'll show you here. Internal controls on the last page, similar to the other report. Again, noting no material weaknesses in the internal controls over compliance. So that gets us to page 87, kind of a one-page summary of everything I just talked about. really the most important things you kind of need to know from those reports that we just covered. Talks about the financial statements, federal awards, identifies the major programs.
Did you say 87?
77, sorry. Yep,
We don't have an
77.
87.
Just shy. So that was 77. And then 78 is the schedule I referenced a couple minutes ago, the schedule of findings and questioned costs. So there's a prescriptive way of everything that's to be included when we write this up, and you can see everything from criteria down to the views of the responsible officials is included here. That's the write-up. Goes on to 79. It has to be placed in two different sections, but we just reference, it's already written up in one. We don't need to write it up again. Takes us to page 80, schedule expenditures of federal awards. That's the first page of it. And then page 81, there you'll see the totals at the bottom. So total expenditures of federal awards this past year, about $5.4 million. 82, just some notes to that schedule, nothing important necessarily to touch on there. Nothing has really changed from the last year that's included there. 83 is the summary schedule of prior year's audit findings. So I could, it's nice to say that this is only a prior year finding. It's not a recurring finding again this year. In large part, I think, to what Greg mentioned earlier with Bobby coming on board, helping with the business office. If you read through this finding from last year, it was basically related to audit adjustments needing to be made to get the numbers kind of finalized. And that wasn't necessary this year, so that finding no longer exists within the financial report. But a prior year finding is required to be included for the reporting package. And then page 84 is that corrective action plan I mentioned earlier, relating to the procurement finding for the current year. I don't want to jump back and go through the 60 or 70 pages we skipped, but I think you have in front of you a handout that kind of looks like this, has a bunch of numbers on it, a bunch of views. We'll just run through that quick, give you some highlights from what we saw. Gives a little bit of a comparison to the previous years as well. So kind of the first two sections relate to the general fund. Obviously, as you know, revenues and expenses keep increasing year over year, just as you would expect. Real estate taxes make up about 53% of total revenues this past year, and federal and state makes up about 27% of total revenues for the district. Federal revenue numbers you can see have been really going up the last 2 years, and that's really due to those COVID relief funds that have been flowing into this district as well as every other district throughout the Commonwealth. Expenditures, they came in under budget, about $1 million under budget. Ultimately, fund balance increased $320,000, so the district was sitting at $18.8 million in fund balance in the general fund as of 6/30/22. Bottom portion, capital projects, debt service funds. So there's the capital reserve fund. Obviously, we're seeing a spend down of the money that was placed in there with all the construction projects going on throughout the district. Bond construction funds, that revenue number, if you kind of look across that line at the different years, the revenue proceeds and transfers, just about the entirety of that amount is made up of proceeds from debt issuances, which the district has been undergoing, at least for the last 5 years. I didn't go back into year 6 and 7, but potentially even back that far. And then along with that, the debt service payments, you see those increasing year over year. That's the principal and interest paid on the bonds that have been issued. Fiscal year 2023, district's scheduled to pay about $9.8 million in principal and interest. Second page of that little handout. First item, food service fund results. See a drop in the local revenues back in 2021 and continued into 2022. Obviously, that's pandemic related. But we also see, of course, kind of a corresponding jump in an increase in the state and federal revenues in 21 and 22. Students have been provided free meals during this time, which have been subsidized by the state and federal government. That's why you see those numbers are up. End result on the food service, an increase to the net position about $860,000. And the last table there, assets, liabilities. These show some of the more significant items of the district, which you'll only see on the government-wide statement of net position. Probably not something you see on a regular monthly reporting. So just wanted to point out some of those. But one of the most important items of any balance sheet, cash. I think the district is in a strong cash position. 20 million in the general fund, 10 in the capital reserve, another 25, 26 in the construction funds. Obviously, a lot of this will be spent down as construction projects continue to be completed. Along with that, capital assets increasing year over year due to the construction projects, additions, renovations to the school buildings. This past year, about 27 million of assets added, majority, about 26 million of that went to construction in progress, so directly related to those building improvements. Long-term debt, looking at about 137 million there. That includes all the district's 8 bond issuances that were outstanding as of 6/30/22. PSERS OPEB liabilities, those are going to more likely not continue to go up in the future. You see a little bit of a drop this year, but those change based on the actuarial valuations that occur every year. The number represented there is just the district's proportion of the total PSERS liability. So the district's portion is about 0.23%. The total PSERS liability is about 44 billion. So you kind of see how those numbers are looking. And then leases payable, not a large amount, but I just wanted to point it out because that's what has been added to the statements due to the GASB 87 implementation that I touched on when I first was covering that first audit opinion. So that's that document. And there's probably a third document that you have, which is the required communication letter. A lot of what's in that letter I think I've already covered. But just a quick summary of some of the other items that we didn't touch on. One, there were no uncorrected misstatements during our audit, so anything identified as a potential needing to be adjusted, management team was more than willing to do so, so nothing uncorrected in the statements. No disagreements with management, always good, and we didn't have any issues or difficulties in performing the audit. That really goes back to, I think we can say that was a smooth process for us this year, large part thanks to the help of Greg, Bobby, Kristen, the rest of the business office, both during the audit and more importantly, I think throughout the year, the work that they do really helps make the audit go smoothly. So that kind of takes me to the end of what I had intended to present. So if there's any questions, comments now, or if you have questions in the future, I think you have my business card there. You can reach out to me as needed.
I have a question. I guess I don't have a clear understanding what the corrective, I see the action plan here, but I'm not really sure what we were in compliance with. Can you just explain that?
Sure. So go back to page 78 and the write-up of the finding relating to procurement. Kind of in summary, so there's regulations that requires the district to follow procurement policies. In this one instance, from our sampling of what we did, we identified that those procurement policies were not followed. So this was in the food service fund, the cafeteria related monies. The district has been utilizing a vendor for a long time. I think they've been providing good service. You haven't really seen a need to potentially look elsewhere. And because of the amount that's been paid to that vendor, it's hit the threshold of requiring either quotations or bids to be done annually, and that didn't occur. So it finds its way into the report as a compliance finding relating to procurement.
So are you recommending that one of the steps to follow is to bid that out?
Yep, exactly.
Those
Pretty
items, yeah.
Yeah.
Those items. So. The complexity probably comes a little bit from, I think as the board knows, at the state level, we have procurement requirements that require us to get quotes, bids, or we can use a joint purchasing agreement or state contracts. At the state level, though, we don't necessarily have those obligations around perishable goods. The issue comes from the fact that the food service program is supported federally, and the federal requirements, they have another set of requirements around procurement. And so that's where there was the issue. And so we've met internally and with food service and talked about the issue, and we'll get it corrected. So
Thank you for explaining that.
Any other questions for Z? Great, excellent report, very concise, appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
As Z's leaving, I'll just mention that Porter and Ritter has actually gotten a number of other school district audits. I think of the 24, I don't know that you're up to half, but I think you've gotten a big chunk of them. So we've appreciated the partnership, but I think Porter and Ritter's done a nice job, and I think they've expanded their audit footprint into RIU. So thank you, Z.
Thank you.
Moving forward to 2.02, Cumberland Perry Area CTC Budget 23-24. Mr. Longwell?
Mr. Sanker. The annual CTC budget is something that we normally review around this time of year. And so just, I thought, as a reminder for our board, the amount that we pay the CTC is based on a 5-year rolling average. And so in the report, it would be PDF page 15, or the report itself is numbered, and at the bottom there would be page 10. That's the page that I like to refer to when I look at the budget. The entirety of the budget's a great document to read through, but if you want to see the bottom line impact of what's it mean for Mechanicsburg in terms of our enrollment and our cost, based on the 5-year average, our annual tuition to the CTC for 2023-24 would be $507,729. That's an increase from our prior year cost, which is 2022-23, the current, I guess that's the year we're in now, right? That cost of $471,658. And so I think one thing that's probably worth noting in the report, in an earlier page, it also talks about that 5-year average and how that's developed. And so you'll see that if you go back 5 years ago, our enrollment was more like 50 students. And now that you get to the current year, our enrollment's probably closer to 80 or more is what we're getting credit for. And so as the 5 years rolls on and enrollment continues to increase, we'll probably increase our overall average and thus the cost that we're paying to the CTC. I think it's a good problem to have, though, too, because it represents more students going to the CTC, and I think the CTC has been making a nice effort around aligning themselves programmatically to the needs in industry and trying to provide opportunities for students. And so that pairs a little bit with what's happening at the high school and providing options for students. So that's something that I kind of look at through maybe another lens. So
I know that Mr. Brune doesn't like to make this kind of a comparison, but at a very high level, the reality is that the closer we get to the capacity in that building, the less it costs per student to go to that building. And I understand when he gets into the weeds of it and says, well, it looks different in every program, but very generally speaking, the more they can get into enrollment in that facility, the better off it is for us. So as much as our numbers have increased, the cost hasn't risen at the same rate.
that's a good point, Dr. Blake. Thank you.
Do you know how full they are? Are they like
They're, well,
98% or something?
they're getting very close, which is one of the reasons for the project, the construction project they want to do. I don't know off the top of my head, but they're much closer than they were 5 years ago.
Brian, do you know how many more students they're going to be able to take with the construction, or?
Yeah, it's somewhere around 380 or 400, and I don't know what that means for our allocation for it, but it's going to take the building from almost 1,400 to almost 1,800 is the goal. So there'll be more for everyone, and I think that's a definite benefit. We had a meeting last night and heard that the early bird, that's probably not the right term, but the application process that came in already before the end of the year, I think they had 800 applications for 500 spots. So I'm like, why, now they have to go through an interview process and the rest of it too, but if they're already essentially at a wait list before they even get to, the next 2 rounds. So there's definitely a need for the project, definitely, and I think zooming back in on Mechanicsburg, I think it's a great spot to be in, as you described, Mr. Longwell, that we have years of lower enrollment that are affecting us positively as we increase dramatically, from 50 to 80 is a big increase in students. So we're getting a good value for the education of those students right now. And when I was thinking, well, what about the rest of the budget increases and that's all described here? But there's not a lot else that is affecting the budget. They had a new CBA agreement, so there's a change in the increase there for salaries, but other than that, it's not a lot that's been affecting the budget other than enrollment. So I think we're in really good shape.
Well, it seems like they can almost take 25% more people for kids.
We've not, well, they right now we're at, as Dr. Lighty said, something like 98%. Like they're at capacity now, and not until we add, we'll be able to add whatever they figured out. It kind of worked out magically that's what the program needs will sort of be kind of fitting what the last wait list was, like it's 400, 500. So hopefully we'll be able to take care of that gap.
What's the trigger to reassess the representation of boards? I see some have 2, some have 3, and I noticed that some are shifting in different directions.
It's at 10%. You go from, it's kind of 10% and 20%. You think of it like 1 rep up to 10 and then 2 reps up to 20. And so, West Perry dropped down, though, and it's a shift based on the rest of the group, right? They've been very consistent. Just ask this question yesterday. They've been really consistent with enrollment at like 125, but as the rest of the districts changed their enrollment, they went from having 2 reps down to 1. And I'll also update you that we're at 12 of the 13 districts that have approved it. Yes, so that's great, except for the one holdout that I went to and won't be approving it or won't be considering it until April. So I don't think I jinxed us, but no.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't go to any more then.
Yeah, maybe.
So they're not resistant as far as you know, they're just not getting to it yet.
They all expressed support for both tech students, and then all had reasons why they couldn't come up with it right now. So I don't know what to tell you. They had to. It was early in their budget process, and they had no idea what's going on with it.
Sounds like you need to go meet with them.
I was happy to talk to them about their budget, but that wasn't going to be helpful to them. So
They're also in the process of a superintendent transition.
Yes,
So I think that was part of the rationale.
I agree. I think that's a good position where someone else needed to say, I've looked at this and it's okay.
Then it sounds like Dr. Lighty needs to talk to the new
No,
superintendent.
I appreciate that offer, but I'll.
We'll send you over the mountain.
Stick
That's
with
fine.
this.
Good work.
That's all I have on that. I mean, if anything else, Mr. Longwell, and the
No.
rest of this document?
Nothing else on the CTC? No.
Great. Okay, on to item 2.03, construction change orders. Mr. Longwell, lead us off on that.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. So I'll just refer the board to the agenda there. The agenda item has on it a change order summary, which is where I'll probably spend most of my focus on here this evening. And then there's 3 other documents that list the individual change orders by building, that being Broad Street, North Side, and High School Project 1. And so as the board's aware, those 3 projects were ongoing, and 2 of the 3 actually have become substantially complete. And so as we look at the summary, the change order summary, all of our construction projects, including the kindergarten academy, are listed for reference. And so the way the document is laid out is that we have the previously approved change orders, those pending approval by the board, and then total change orders. And as a point of context, we have the last column in orange where we show the percentage of contracts, that being the change orders as a percentage of the total contract on each of the projects. The reason that's an important benchmark or threshold for us is we've been using 5% as part of the budgeting process for each of our construction projects. And so the threshold or the progress that we want to see as the construction projects continue is that we want to be living within that 5% corridor. And so as long as change orders are within that 5% corridor, I think we're on target and kind of in line with our construction budgets. And so as you look down through the projects, including what we're going to be looking at with the board, you have all of the projects living within that 5%. I think the other good thing that I wanted to point out too is there's 7 projects listed and 6 of them now are substantially complete. And so as you're kind of looking at the percentages of change orders as contract, I think, successfully closing out those projects. High school project 1 is the 7th that is going to be substantially complete in the near future. And so that one's well on its way. As we look forward to the future and future conversations around change order summary, we'll end up picking up high school project 2, which is the renovation of the existing building. And so we'll be tracking that as that project gets underway for the board's awareness and to keep apprised of where we are with things. So I have asked Mr. Kastner to also be here this evening in support of Dr. Lighty and I's effort to review change orders with the board. And if there's any additional questions, we can kind of review them at this point.
I know you alluded that we're almost done with the high school project 1, but how much is that? Like, do we expect more change orders yet?
There might be a couple being processed, but nothing
Substantial.
substantial. And we have kids coming in Friday. So
What?
we have kids coming in Friday to the.
To occupy the addition.
Yeah.
No. Sorry.
Is that because there were snow or something? They're not coming back till Friday?
No, they've never been in there.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't, have a couple months worth of bills yet.
Right. So to your point, Ms. Morgan, just in measuring maybe what's the opportunity for additional change orders on high school project 1, I think it's a good point. A lot of what you see was stuff encountered earlier on in the project, and now that we're in the finishing phases, that's where you start to see things kind of level off. And I think with it being around 3.1%, I think we're feeling pretty good about where we are. So the next project really that we'll be watching very closely is high school project 2 as that comes online and tracking where we are with things. And so in a future report, we'll obviously add that and have that conversation on top of it.
The same kind of question. So the way, because I'm in my mind from our tour of the new edition, it was, steel beams and all that. We're down to like the punch list there. Is that or
Yes.
beyond that? That's great.
We're into the punch list now. There's some ongoing work, but it's all finishing up kind of work, and really we're down to the punch list.
Can I probably should know this after all these years, but okay, so we budget 5%. So if we only use 3%, do we get to pocket the 2%? Is that what?
Yeah, that's a good question this morning. So it's part of kind of how we reconcile all of the projects. And so as we're issuing debt, we're also tracking the actual project costs against the budgets. And so for instance, all of the elementary projects, we still have a little bit of some punch list and warranty things to get to on some of the elementary projects, but we're kind of reconciling the collective 6 projects against all the money we borrowed for the elementary projects, and we feel good about where that's at. And so as a separate bucket, I'll say we're going to then do that same reconciliation of we borrowed the money, we borrowed the money based on the construction budgets, and as the actual costs are accumulated and we're finalizing the projects at project 1 at the high school and project 2 at the high school, how did we do in terms of the budget, the borrowing, and then what the total actual costs were. And so, but
I was, so like the 2% that we don't use, does that stay in the construction fund that you can be applied to another project or?
yeah, and so if there's any money left over, that's a good question. The way we word the bond documents is that they're for, we call out the specific projects that we're working on, but in the bond issuance, we also speak to any money left over at the end of all of construction can be rolled into the capital reserve fund for other capital and facility needs of the school district. And so when all the dust settles, then we'll kind of reevaluate where we are, but I think we're in a good place overall, so.
Anything else on change orders? Thank you, Mr. Kastner, Mr. Longwell.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Kastner. As Mr. Kastner's getting up to leave, I know he's a very humble person and doesn't necessarily like all the accolades, but he does come before us periodically, and I just have to say the management of the projects and what he does to support our building administrators, but also what's happening on a day-to-day basis is a tremendous effort. And I think the conversations he has with our contracts about keeping projects on time, but also managing change orders is nothing short of a great effort. So thank you, Mr. Kastner.
Thank you.
Last item, 2.04 transportation services contract. Mr. Longwell.
Thank you, Mr. Senker. So we've had a lot of conversations about staffing shortages and how that impacts our system. We've reacted in different areas to try to supplement, what are the gaps that are being created by those staff shortages. And so I think on the transportation front, it's probably not surprising that, we are experiencing some issues either around staff shortages or the capacity to add additional services with our current contractor. That's nothing against what BNS Transportation is able to do for us. They're doing, I think, quite a nice job, especially when you look at transportation contractors across the state. We comparatively don't have the same number of vacancies as some other school districts, but we do have some vacancies. And I think where we're particularly impacted is around van runs. And so when we're adding van runs, BNS Transportation has reached the point where they can't give us anything additional in terms of additional van runs. We've, through our transportation director, we've talked to some of our neighboring school districts. We have a great collaborative relationship in that way that we can talk about different services and see if there's ways to work together. Their contractors too are unable to offer us any van runs or maybe even offer them, their own school district, any van runs. We've talked to the IU who offers van transportation. There's a new upstart company that focuses on van runs, but even they don't have capacity to give us. And so we're kind of starting to reach the end of the line in terms of what are some options to provide those additional services that we're seeking around van transportation. And so one option that we've kind of come back to is it's a transportation services contract with Assist Services, LLC. And so this is a little bit different of an approach where this organization, this business, employs independent contractors who use their own vehicles. They have a standard around the vehicles that are being used with registrations, years, makes, models, things like that. And then the individuals driving the vehicles have to obviously comply with clearances and things of that nature. And so in vetting it out, we've talked to some of our neighboring school districts about it. There's at least one that's already using them for van runs as we speak. And there's several other school districts in our IU who are investigating using them as well. And so we're not seeing this as a replacement for BNS Transportation, but as another tool in our toolbox when we're having trouble fulfilling the needs of a van run. We can turn to this services and see might they be able to give us services for a van run or 2 or 3, and that is a supplement to our existing structure. And really, I would view it as more of a temporary arrangement. I don't think we're looking at this as a 10 or 20-year arrangement, but just because of some of the staff shortages and service interruptions, what are some other options? So.
And what's the ask of this agenda item? For you to have a conversation, or is it to have a contract? Because I just would like to understand the premium that we'll pay when we have to utilize this Assist Services.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mrs. Maris. So it's really around the contract, and so because it's so unique, we want to seek the board's approval, perhaps at February, if that's an option from the board. We would look for some direction this evening. In terms of the cost, that's also a good question. So our van transportation is based on the state formula, is how we calculate that. I think probably our board is aware we have a little different approach with our bus contractor, our bus the way we calculate our bus payments. But in terms of the van transportation, it probably would be a 30% premium is an estimate based on the numbers that we've seen. So we would use it knowing, use it more sparingly, knowing there's additional costs involved, but at using it as a last resort when maybe we don't have any other options.
Is there a fixed cost to like get in the service too? Like, 10 grand plus the cost of the
No,
trips?
not the, I think it's on a usage basis, so.
I don't know why, but this somehow is making me a little nervous.
It is,
Just because, people are using their individual cars and,
So it's basically like an Uber.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm saying.
so I think there, in conversation with Assist, we would also have the right of refusal, and so if we're gonna use them for a van run, what are the vehicles that, they would propose to use? They provide, documentation around it, whether it be, the registration inspection, things like that, year, make and model, and then also the clearances for the driver, would be important.
Liability insurance and all that too.
Yeah.
But to a conversation you and I just had the other day, what about markings on their vehicles? That, especially if they're picking kids up at their houses and they're going out into the public street and all that, how well are these
So-
Ubers marked?
So they'll have school student markings on the vehicles as well. And to your point, Mr. Rupp, the school code has certain requirements around how school vans and school buses are to be marked, even up to including the lettering and the yellow background and things like that. So that is part of it, that they have to be marked appropriately.
Because, I don't know if the vans are, with the buses being, if there's video cameras and audio, like that, and I don't know if the vans are that way, like buses are required.
Yeah, we don't have cameras on our current vans either. And so I hear what you're saying though, but there's not cameras.
So thinking of it as an option of last resort because you've exhausted the other options.
Yes.
I
But
mean,
not, I want to be clear, it's an optional last resort, you're correct, but
Yeah,
we
not
wouldn't
from
be
a service
recommending
level.
this if we
Yeah.
thought that there was any increased
Yeah.
safety concerns
Yeah,
or
right.
worries beyond
Right.
the people that we hire ourselves or the contractor hires to do this. There's still a safety element to
But
this.
the vans run, and I think, the parents have the knowledge it's the same van or bus or person that's driving that van shows up every day. Like, are we going to be having the same person show up every day?
Yes, it
or-
would be, we'd be looking for that regularity. That's,
Because
I
I
think, what we
would
would talk
want
about
a
with
different
it.
person picking up my child every single day.
We would talk
But,
about
I
that
mean,
with assists.
If it's the last resort, is it every day?
It depends. I mean, it could be if it comes down to it. I think, and last resort, I think Dr. Leidy articulated that well. And so I didn't mean it as a negative connotation, more to the point that we'll obviously work with BNS first. And as long as they're still not having the ability to fill a van run, if we have a need for 5 days a week van run for the continuing foreseeable future, then we would talk to assist as an option.
Can we, like, the vans that are coming through BNS, can they be like they pick them up, drop some kids off, and then come back and do a second round, knowing we would accept that the kids would be a little late?
So we've been pretty creative, I think, already, to Ashley Wierzinski's credit with that, and also BNS. They've tried many different combinations. I know Mr. Bigham's even talked to the county about having the county help us with some situations through homelessness. But I think the route combinations, we've definitely exhausted that, whether that's true of our school buses too, and our vans, that we've tried many different combinations. And I think you start to get into instructional minutes and things, and if we're not having the students there at the start of the day and the end of the day, till the end of the day, does that cause other issues for us if we're not providing?
Have we ever asked parents if they'd be willing to drive their own child to where they have to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So earlier in the year, that was an additional measure that we had examined and even put in a board update there that we, like other school districts, have entered into individual parent contracts where we pay just based on the IRS mileage rate. And so we are doing that for some parents. I think unfortunately, some families don't have that ability to provide the transportation for any number of reasons. And so I think in terms of trying to exhaust options, we've looked at, we know that we want to do the right thing by the students and get, provide the services, whether it be required through IEP or homelessness, or there's a variety of reasons why they might need a van run. And looking at either our contractor, other contractors, can parents drive the IU? And I think that's where I was heading with last resort. Not that they're an issue with them, because the feedback we've even gotten from the district that is using them currently is very good. The feedback is, so.
One more question.
Sure.
Are the vans that we're using to pick up kids, are they filled to capacity? Because I see vans going by, with one
Yeah.
child in there, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking we could put 6 more in there. I like,
Not always. It sometimes depends on the nature
All
of
right,
the
6 might be
individual
too-
in that. Well,
I know.
even
Right.
one more might
Right.
be an issue. I think it's important for the board to understand that we have children who based on their IEP are actually harnessed into a seat in order to get them to and from school. This is and I appreciate the questions, because I think it's similar to if you go back in society 10, 15 years ago and look at how we felt about Ubers versus cabs, but now we look at that as just commonplace, or Airbnbs versus hotel rooms, right? I think this is similar to that. I'm going to be honest with you, given the dire nature of the traditional approach, of finding people to take this traditional approach, I wouldn't be surprised if services like this in the next decade become more predominant than what we're currently doing.
And
but I think what you're saying is like adults are taking the Ubers and the B&Bs as opposed to a 7-year-old, and I don't know.
And the other thing, I respect your question on the capacity of the vans versus the actual usage, but I think vans are a little more different than the buses, where we can try to perfect capacity versus the vans where there's other factors why the vans may or may not be full based on ride times, where they're going, if they're going to other outside placements, things like that, what the student needs are.
If it turns into a legal answer, I don't want to do it right now, but because of the premium of this service, is BNS in breach of their contract by not being able to provide the vans that we require?
Yeah, I think the contract is probably, it's a good question. I think
I
the
mean, if
contract,
we have a contract with them to provide a service, they're not providing it, why are the taxpayers paying the premium to do something they can't fulfill? And I just want to bring the issue up. It's really isn't the appropriate time to talk in any detail, because it would be a legal contractual issue. Just something that
It's
popped into
worth,
my
it's
mind
worth
that-
investigating that further, I think, and we can.
It just popped into my mind sitting here that
I mean, I think in the past couple of years, we've been very loyal to BNS, and, even though they were running the buses a lot less, we made concessions to pay them as much as we did still.
Well, I think any parent could make the same result to us, that we're not fully staffed as a district. And they're not getting their money's worth. I mean, everybody's having trouble finding people. BNS is no different from where we're at. So if we're gonna start pointing fingers at BNS, maybe the taxpayers should start suing us for the same reason.
What would be the result of that?
I'm not saying we're suing anybody, number one.
And that's
but-
what you were bringing up.
No,
That's exactly what you were bringing
I'm
up.
just saying that we, in the past, have leaned a little bit towards their way, continuing to pay them when they weren't supplying services to us.
My point being, we're expecting them to provide a service, serve the taxpayers and Mechanicsburg, and we're not even fully staffed where we're at. So it's tough for us to throw anything at somebody else whenever we're not even fully staffed in our district.
I think maybe the other thing I was going to mention, I hear you're on staff shortages, and the other thing I think I was going to mention around Ms. Morgan's point was as difficult of a time as we're having with staff shortages, I think in the transportation world, it is magnified quite a bit, especially in other school districts. And we have certainly, I think, been a good partner to BNS. They've been a good partner to us. And I think the RFPs that I've heard around vans and buses have come back pretty unfavorably for the school district when they have happened, because there is such a shortage around contractors and staffing. And so that's just another element maybe to it all. But
I think Mr. Rupp's question is worth investigating and,
Yeah.
and finding some answers
Sure.
in the right venue for that. But I think considering this service and this question as something we should resolve here, is whether or not we want to move on with regard to, still may need to further discuss it with regard to BNS. So, and I apologize. I said last resort. You didn't say that. I think you choose your words really carefully, and I was saying it the wrong way. I think we should. I think it was definitely worth the conversation on all this with safety and students involved. So I'm glad we had this. What other questions we have or other discussion points? And if not, do we feel comfortable bringing this one forward at the next voting meeting?
I think we have to provide the service, so
Yeah.
we have to move it forward. We, then look at other options and avenues as required.
All right. Taking the silence is a good step to move forward. So,
It's even not.
yeah, I'm sorry. I was.
Hear it rattle.
I couldn't hear it. Yeah.
I didn't say anything.
All right. That comes to the end of this committee's agenda. So meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the January 24th, 2023 work session. I'd also like to announce that the meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with the recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. Move on to item 3, budget and finance. Item 3.01, general fund budget trends.
Yeah, so this evening, what we'd like to do is share with the board exactly what it says are trends that we're seeing as we move forward with budget preparation. For those of you that have been on the board for a while, you might remember that years ago, we started doing a presentation similar to this in the fall of the year. But what would happen was it was so general in nature that we'd come back and pretty much have to repeat everything in the spring with the updated information. So our hope is that by talking about the trends associated with the upcoming budget, it'll give you some background as to why we're approaching the expenditures and the revenue the way we are in the next couple months. So I'm going to ask Mr. Longwell to just go ahead and dive in and we'll run through this together.
Thank you, Dr. Leidy. And I think just to echo Dr. Leidy's comments, the trends I think are helpful because they do provide context and background around what is happening on the revenue side of the budget and what's happening on the expense side of the budget. And so in some regards, tonight's really a preview and an update to say, here's our most significant revenues, here's our most significant expenses, and here's some of the trends that we're seeing. And so that when we get to the March budget presentation, which as the board recalls, we do in a 2-part presentation. We do the revenue normally at the beginning of March, and then the expense side of the budget at the end of March. As we're updating numbers and showing increases or decreases in certain areas, then we'll have had already the trend conversation, and so some of that won't be, I think, maybe as surprising. And so as we move to the next slide here, just a very brief agenda. The revenue summary is really a reminder about the composition of our revenues, and so where are we getting our revenues from, whether that be federal, state, or local. The revenue trends that we would like to look at this evening are what's happening with our real estate taxes, but in particular, real estate assessed values. And so assessed values are a big component of what real estate tax revenue looks like. We'll talk about the trends in earned income tax. Interest income is an interesting one because, as the board knows, that's been a very low number in our budget for years, a number of years, but we're starting to see that come back around as the economy, or as the interest rate environment increases, I should say. And then the state subsidies, particularly basic education funding and special education funding, and then I tied that and make a connection, well, I should say Bobby and I tied that and made a connection to special education costs, because as much as we want to look at special education funding, I think you have to also then take a look at what's happening with special education expenses. We'll spend a little time looking at a distribution of expenses. So we've kind of aggregated and said in a pie chart, what drives expense in the entirety of our budget, and kind of look at those in buckets, whether that be personnel or other. And then some expense trends around wages and benefits, medical expense, PSERS retirement, and then this is maybe one of a favorite topic is charter school, and what is happening there, especially through the pandemic. It rose pretty significantly, but we're seeing it come back down, and so we'll give the board an update on some of the trends there. The revenue summary, really beginning here as a reminder for the board, this probably hasn't changed too much. We're right around 74% in local revenue, 25% in state revenue, and closer to 2% in federal dollars. And so the federal dollars has probably ticked up a little bit just because of some of the stimulus and COVID relief monies that we've gotten, but the state and local being very similar proportions to what they have been in the past. In terms of real estate taxes, this is our real estate assessed values. And so for perspective's sake, the left-hand side there are the values of the aggregate values of the real estate in our school district. And so as we add more properties, as we add new developments, then it adds real estate tax revenue. And so the chart here that I want to draw your attention to is obviously the upward trend. I think is one of the things you notice right away. That I think is unsurprisingly representative of a growing school district. And so when you look at all of the construction that has happened, certainly since 11-12, 12-13, you can see the district really starting to grow, whether that be new neighborhoods or some commercial properties or even some warehouses that have gone in. The other thing I think is interesting that's worth drawing the board's attention to is this goes to, as Dr. Leidy and I have worked over the years, and then also including Bobby here, through the year, we also track, when you hear us talk about tracking the trend of revenues or the trend of expenses and updating that in the budget, real estate assessed values have grown year over year, but if you look at the gray, the steel and the maroon bars there, the steel represents the beginning of the year of that fiscal year. The maroon represents the end of that fiscal year. And so you can see the growth that's happening even within the year. And so we're getting monthly updates from the county, and we're tracking and trending what's happening with real estate tax revenue, because it is one of the single largest line items in the revenue side of the picture. And so for perspective's sake, we're talking closer to 43 million of our entire general fund budget is on the real estate side of things. Earned income tax is probably the second biggest line item on the revenue side. And so there you can see from 12-13 on to 21-22, I would draw the board's attention to that increasing trend in earned income taxes. Over the years, we've talked about at a state level, the average from the independent fiscal office shows anywhere from 3-4% on average wage growth in the state of Pennsylvania. And so being that earned income tax is a proportional tax, you'd expect to see that 3 or 4% coming through in terms of how the revenue is growing year over year. There's been some years we've seen a little more growth there. And so you can see that in 18-19, a little bigger jump than probably what we were used to at that 3 to 4% level. And then interestingly, you talk about how data can tell a story. 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, you can start to see where COVID flattened earned income taxes. And so I would say that was a direct result of what was happening during the pandemic. The good thing is, I think you could because you could look at that two ways. It flattened earned income taxes, and so we didn't see quite as much growth as we normally would, but we also didn't see a decline either. And so I think that is worth noting. At one point, there was some question about could some organizations, governmental entities, see a 10 or 20% dip in earned income taxes, and we did not see that. 21, 22, we see a sharp increase, and as we look at 22, 23, we're only partway through the year, we're seeing some increases as well there as compared to even 21, 22. And so that's a trend that we're tracking, and we'll be updating the earned income tax revenue line item as we finalize the budget and come back to the board in March. So interest income, so if you go back even before 11, 12, you have where the economy dipped and interest rates really bottomed out and stayed low for a number of years. 16, 17, the interest rates started to come back around, and you can see where revenue was on the rebound in the general fund. And then COVID happened and interest rates sunk to an all-time low. And so at an all-time low, we saw that the interest revenue also sink down to its one of the lower points probably in the 10-year history that's there. I think a couple things. One is interest rates are coming back around now, and they're getting higher. That's the importance of cash flow management and the partnerships we have with our financial institutions. And so that's another credit to Bobby and the finance team, is that in managing cash flow, looking at CDs and other deposit vehicles, we're able to, I think, maximize interest earnings, and we expect in the upcoming budget to see revenue certainly on the upswing in terms of interest revenue, interest income. The other thing I think I wanted to just point out here is there is a relationship, maybe an inverse relationship, between on the debt side, we are now seeing the increase in costs because interest rates are rising. But on the revenue side, with the cash deposits and investments we have, we're going to see an increase in earnings there, where it was a little bit of the other way around through 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, well, I should say 2021, 21, 22, when it was at all-time lows for borrowing, we weren't really earning a whole lot on our cash and investments, our deposits and investments. And so we're seeing that kind of turn around, as Brad has shared, obviously the impact on the debt side of things, but on the interest income side of things, we'll also be looking at that as part of the budget process. This is a chart for state subsidy, the gray, the steel there. The maroon is the special education subsidy. And so through, by and large, basic education subsidy has continued to increase year over year. Depends on the state's budget annually, but that is something that we are still waiting to hear the new governor's address, and so we don't have any information just yet, but we'll be monitoring that closely as we head to March and hoping to hear more about what are the plans around education funding in the state, particularly for basic education funding and special education funding. The other thing I would maybe draw the board's attention to is the maroon line there, pretty flat, just under 2 million, getting to 2 million over that course of time. If you remember that and then kind of think of that, here's the maroon line again representing special education subsidy, but also with special education expenses as the steel line above it. And so that's been one challenge we've talked about with the board. We obviously believe deeply in supporting student needs. The challenge is that when you look at special education expenses and how those continue to grow, and then what's happening at a state level in terms of their support for those expenses, you can see the special education subsidy, which is one of the primary vehicles for supporting those expenses, is pretty flat as compared to some of the significant increases we've had around related to special education and other needs.
Mr. Longwell, does any of the increase in the basic ed, I'm trying to think how to say this, is any of that special education money in a traditional sense that's just paid in the basic education subsidy now under the new funding formula?
So that's a good question.
I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
kind of like,
Yeah, I think I got it, and maybe I'll ask for feedback here in a minute to make sure I've hit the question or answer the question well. But in the more recent years, I'll say, the state has started to distribute money through the new special education formula and the new basic education formula. And so the new basic education formula is to help be a more dynamic and responsive way to distribute money to, I guess, be more equitable, I'll say, in the state. Because if you have a fast-growing district, you would expect that their state revenue would be more responsive to that fast growth. If you have a declining enrollment, you would expect that on some level, the money that they get should also be responsive maybe to that decline. Part of the issue, though, is for a very long time, we've had hold harmless in effect, and so only a portion of basic education funding is distributed through the formula, with still a large percentage as hold harmless. Special education is the same way, where you have hold harmless, but the newer money being distributed through the special education formula. And so, like the basic education formula, special education does take into account the level of need of students. It looks at a number of factors, but it helps to be more responsive to what's happening with special education in your school district, and then helping to distribute money.
So yes, the new money is,
Being-
through special ed, is going through the formula.
What is the special ed formula, not the standard?
Correct. But did,
That was your question.
Yeah, yes. So it's still the traditional funding that went into the special education funding. That has not changed, just the way the formula is to how much
The
to
way they're
get.
distributing it, yeah,
Right.
it's changed. And so they're keeping hold harmless in effect, but all the new money is running.
So what we're seeing in the basic education is truly for basic education. It's not including
Oh, I'm
any
sorry.
prior
Yeah.
special education
Yeah.
funding.
And that maybe is to Mrs. Maris's point.
Yes.
I maybe didn't capture that well, answering
Well, I
the
didn't say
question.
it well either.
The basic ed is the basic education, just looking at basic ed revenue or subsidy, and then the maroon there is just the special education funding
And the only change would be how it's distributed for the new funding.
for both of them, yes. Yes. So in a similar way that we kind of looked at revenues and tried to take, and say, what's the composition of it, state, local, or federal? If you try to combine and summarize our expenses into a pie chart, I think a good way to summarize it would be about 42% of our budget is wages, about 29% is benefits. And so taken together, personnel cost is about 71%. And that's pretty typical in school districts. I'd say between 70 and 75% is pretty normal when you look at personnel costs as a percentage of the total budget. Then purchase services is right around 15%. And so purchase services includes things like tuition to outside agencies, it includes service contracts, it includes repairs and maintenance. So I would say it's both instructional and support that you see costs there for purchase services. And then supplies and equipment we've aggregated there that shows that's about 5% of the entire budget. And then other and financing, I would just say really it's probably mostly financing, 10%, just below 10%. And so that's another, I'll say, cross-check, if you will, or a threshold that we look at administratively is where is our total debt as a percentage of our budget, and 10% is a good number to kind of keep back of the napkin in mind as we're looking at how are we spending our money and what's the composition of that spending. In terms of wages and benefits, there you can see the steel line is wage growth over the last 10 years. The point here I think want to make is benefits is catching up to it. It certainly hasn't matched it, but the rate of growth of benefits is closing the gap. And benefits includes things like medical insurance and PSERS, and so we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. Medical expenses is one of the first ones we want to touch on here as it relates to benefit expense. And so you can see some increases, some leveling off, and then increases and alternating there until we got to about COVID where things flattened out. And then in 21, 22, we saw about a 20% increase in medical expenses as we rounded out that year. And that's the audit that Z was just in talking about. We're monitoring that as we head into 22, 23, which is the current year. I'll say that encountering that 20% in 21, 22, as we look at the growth in that expense for 22, 23, we're seeing that more like 3 or 4% as compared to what was happening in 21, 22. And so we'll have to account for all of that in the budget process, and that's something that we're going to take a closer look at.
I don't know if this is the right number, but I had in my head that we also have increased staff. We have more staff than we did 10 years ago. Right? And I was kind of thinking that's something like 100 more employees. If I was thinking we added 10 a year or something like that. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's like a big. I was trying to think of this factor. It isn't just
What's driving
cost
the
increase.
cost.
Yeah, right. It's the fact that we have more staff because we have more students and we have more needs than we did, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at it, Mr. Sanker. I think certainly the number of people covered, and as we've added staff, that has impacted medical expense. And then also a big factor too is what's happening in our actual claims experience. And so to your point, it's probably both of those things that we would be looking at as we prepare the budget.
Like $1.5 million is a big jump in 1 year.
Also keep in mind that 20 and 21, all elective surgeries, anything that wasn't considered to be critical surgeries were pushed off because of COVID. So what you're seeing is 21, 22, one of the reasons for the bump is a lot of those delayed elective surgeries, a lot of the coverage that was delayed during COVID, people are now taking advantage of and saying, you know, I waited 2 years to do a knee replacement and I need that knee replacement. So, you know, across the board, industry-wise, you're seeing that trend because of the fact that the 2 years of elective surgeries being pushed off and delayed.
Yeah, I would think it would be more in the 18, 19 numbers if things haven't went really good. It's a little bit of a trend.
Yep. But that's one of the reasons for the big jump.
And once they realized they reached their deductible, they had the other stuff done.
The overall, when you look at 3, 5, 7, 10-year averages, normally it's probably 70%, you know, despite some of the larger increases or leveling off. I think, you know, what we're really monitoring now is we did have that big increase, and I think COVID certainly is a piece of that, the rebound, if you will, in expenses, but what's happening in claims is something we're going to keep taking a close look at. But I think the good news is, as we look at 22, 23, if you look at 21, 22 as a base year and say, okay, projecting forward, what do we think is going to happen based on actual claims that we're seeing up through current, we're seeing it growing over last year by more like 3 to 4% is where we stand currently. So we'll monitor all that and then be back for another report to the board in March. PSER's employer contribution, and so I will just take a moment. There's a couple of things we're charting here to maybe draw the board's attention to. On the left side of the chart there is the expenses that we've encountered, and that corresponds to the bar chart. So if you look at 2009-10, our PSER's expenses was probably closer to about $1 million. If you follow the bars all the way through 21-22, we're just shy of $12 million. The red line is more oriented to the right-hand side of the chart, which shows the actual PSER's employer contribution rate. And so again, if you look at 2009-10, you can see that contribution rate was closer, it was probably around 4%, between 4 and 5%. As you look forward to 21-22, it was closer to 35%. And so the trend line of the maroon line there, the red line, mirrors in a lot of ways what was happening with expenses, and rightfully so. That's all proportional increases. I think one of the big takeaways there, I think that's interesting to kind of reflect on or think about is if the state's reimbursing us 50% of those expenses, in 2009-10, the net impact on our budget for PSER's contributions was probably around $500,000. If you fast forward to 2021-22, the net amount of those contributions was probably closer to $6 million. And so over the last 11 or 12 years, we've had to absorb through the budget another $5.5 million, I'll say, as an estimate, which is a significant amount of money when you consider the budget of our size. And so that's, I think, a tribute to the financial planning through the years that we've had of how do we absorb such a rapidly increasing cost into the budget, all the while living in a growing community and having other needs to address. So. The last item is charter school expenses, and so that one, I would say, just to draw a comparison to the health insurance, as Mr. Sanker had earlier, when we're looking at trends and data, we do try to say, are there multiple factors impacting what we're seeing? And so in a similar way with charter school, there is the total enrollment that we have at charter school, and so whether that be our regular education students or special education students, that impacts total cost. Also is the tuition rate that we pay the charter schools impacts total cost, and as our costs increase, so too does the charter school tuition rates that we're paying. And so as you look at 11, 12, 12, 13 kind of as a base year in this analysis, you can see we were right around $1 million, maybe a little more. Had some increases there through 1920, and then I would say 2021 really, I should say 1920 and 2021 are representative of the increases, especially around the pandemic, enrollment-wise. Certainly tuition rate would have been in the background there, but you can see such a sharp increase is certainly attributable to what was happening enrollment-wise as we were losing some students to the charter schools. 21-22, our last completed school year, we started to see that come back down again. It hasn't settled in yet, frankly, from an enrollment perspective to the pre-pandemic levels, but it has come back down to more normal levels. And so for perspective's sake, before the pandemic, we probably were, depending on the year, around 130, 140 students out at charter schools. That's inclusive of regular education and special education. At the height of the pandemic, we had 221. And so I know it might seem like 70 or 80 students when we have a total enrollment of 4,600, how does it move the needle that much? But back to the tuition rate, our regular education tuition rate is 13,800 and our special education tuition rate is 29,700. And so even losing 70, 80 students ended up being pretty impactful to the budget, as you can see what happened in 1920 and 2021. Now, as you look at 21, 22, and you see those numbers coming back down, we're settling in, at least this year, in the 170s, I'll say. And that's something that we track monthly. It changes monthly based on enrollment, but in the 170s is kind of where we're at.
This number doesn't include our own?
It does not include our own. And I would say if you plotted out our own enrollment, you'd see a pretty sharp increase, I think, at the height of the pandemic in our own our own cyber school. I think we had upwards of 700 students, I think, at one point, or maybe a little bit even more. And that number has certainly come way back down, probably at a sharper rate than even what's happening here with the charter schools, cyber charter schools in particular.
And what percent of the charter expenses are cyber charters?
That's a good question, Mrs. Mayers. So 94% is cyber charter school and 6% is brick and mortar. And so I think very insightful because, and this might be where you're heading, but the way the formula is to calculate the tuition, is it really representative of the cost to operate a cyber charter school? And then you start to get into conversations around, maybe how they're operating or what's their cost structure and things like that. So.
Other than CASA, what else is available locally?
I'm sorry, Mr.
Other than CASA, what else is available as a brick and mortar charter, like locally?
There are some over toward Harrisburg.
Yeah, there's
I think is one.
I think the point is that the original legislation was written before cyber charter even existed. And then cyber charter came into existence and the legislation has not been changed since, which continues to be the issue that charter schools are here to stay. I don't think anybody is denying that they are part of the equation now. It's about a fair funding piece.
Well, and that's some of the stuff that we talk about, and Mr. Sanker brought it up last time, where if the state funded them directly, maybe we could get into a place where we have a level state fund for them as opposed to this variable in every district that doesn't make any sense. But everybody talks to you about your budget, and where your budgeting opportunities are, and I think we talked about two big ones today, that funding formula, both for regular ed and for special ed. Such a small proportion of the money goes through those that we're stuck in dual harmless still. And a growing district like ours is significantly impacted by that. And then this growth, particularly during COVID that we saw for the charters, puts us in a really difficult position. And that's why so much money comes from our property taxes. And that's a difficult situation we're in.
So did we get any refunds or anything from the government for the cyber school because of COVID? Like,
So through COVID, and that's a good question, Ms. Morgan. Through COVID, at the beginning of the pandemic, we really focused our stimulus monies on responding to the pandemic. And so things like purchasing technology to get us fully one-to-one, or hotspots for families in need. There's a variety of things we did, cleaning, things like that. But it also included was additional resources for our in-house program that we were running virtually. Then as the pandemic went, we really shifted the focus from responding directly to some of the direct costs of the pandemic, to academic achievement and supporting, the gaps in support for students. And so that's really been the path we've all been on. And so we haven't charged directly, to your question.
No, I knew we hadn't, but I didn't know because, it wasn't our choice to close the schools, it was the state. So would the state feel obligated to reimburse any of that cyber money back to the school districts?
I think their response would be that the funding that we received was open-ended enough for us to make that choice if we chose to do so.
To maybe support other areas of the budget, to Dr. Lay's point.
Not a great choice.
So I think this is one that we do continue to monitor. We do offer our own program. I think we're able to do so at a reduced cost. And I think, to Mrs. Maris's point, and frankly what Dr. Lighty said too, it really is about fair funding. And so as you dive into fair funding for cyber schools and charter schools, what does that really look like? And so it includes things, everything from the 500 school districts pay 500 distinct rates that vary pretty significantly from one district to another, to how is the rates themselves calculated for regular ed and special ed, and then even the difference between the regular ed rate and the special ed rate. For that additional money, are they providing that level of service for those students? So an equivalent level of service for those students, I should say.
So much opportunity. And then they don't even need transportation either.
So that concludes the presentation. Really, I think to summarize, as we look at the main portions of our budget on the revenue side, and also the main areas of our budget on the expense side, what are we seeing in the trends around real estate, earned income at the revenue side of the equation, and then on the expense side, what's happening around wages, benefits, PSERS, things like that. So more to come. We expect to come back to the board in March with updated information around what some of these trends and how that translates to our budget moving forward to 23-24.
Further questions for Mr. Longwell on the general fund budget trends? Move on to item 3.02, capital reserve fund budget and facilities planning. Finally, Mr. Hoffman, you get to participate here.
So some changes again for veteran board members. Mr. Longwell talked to you about some of the changes around capital reserve and in the capital reserve fund. I think it's important to note that the commitment that the board made to our facilities over the last 6-7 years has been phenomenal. The reality is it's been over the last 6 or 7 years, and so as we look forward, there are some things that we did not address in facilities, and there's some things that we need to continue to explore around, especially grounds and so on. So I think Mr. Longwell is going to make clear to you this evening that this is just not a one and done conversation, as we typically would do. And I'll let him share with you what's on the list and what's yet to come.
Dr. Leidy. The first piece is some clarification that, well, not only we have received, but all school districts have received from the Department of Education, and it kind of came to light as part of the audit process. And so for a long time at Mechanicsburg and even at a previous district I worked and other districts in the area, the capital reserve fund we looked at as part of a kind of like a savings account to help offset big one-time purchases. And so whether that be big one-time purchases for vehicles, large pieces of equipment, or facilities, costs connected to facilities. The clarification from the department was that things like vehicles, furniture, equipment need to come out of the general fund and not out of the capital reserve fund. And so as the board's aware, from a practical standpoint, we had things like our vehicle replacement cycle. We've done furniture replacement out of there as part of a cycle, even large tech infrastructure things. And so that has changed our mindset a little bit in the sense that as we plan for the general fund budget in 23-24, the upcoming budget, we'll be needing to think about what needs to come out of the capital reserve fund and what's the 3 to 5 year planning that was happening over there, and how's that impact the general fund. As far as tonight's conversation goes, we really want to return for our annual discussion in what we normally have in the January-February timeframe, where we look at the list of projects that we'd like to move forward, kind of prioritize projects where we know we'd like to work on them either in the spring or in the summertime. The list also, as the board awares, contains earmarks where we're continuing to set money aside for other large projects that are coming down the road, like the turf field replacement as an example. That's the first part of the discussion, and Mr. Hoffman will walk us through, he and I will walk through the individual list and kind of address questions at that point. Part two of the conversation is not necessarily going to happen tonight, but as Dr. Leidy alluded to, something that will return to the board for a future discussion around what I'll call facilities planning. And so we are always in the background kind of looking out 3 to 5 years and saying, what's happening with our buildings? What are large projects that we see? You know, what are the costs of those? How do they fit into the budget process? And we're trying to look out so that we're not surprised and all of a sudden saying, we've got to address something next year and scrambling to figure out how to fit it into the budget. And so that 3 to 5 year planning horizon, I think interestingly, as Dr. Leidy mentioned, we've been on a path here of 6 to 7 years of construction for our existing facilities. And then you add 3 to 5 more years and all of a sudden, some of those things might be 10 or 12 years, you know, all of a sudden older. Or some of the other areas of the district where we said, we know we need to move forward on the elementary renovations because of the needs around enrollment and mechanical infrastructure program, that maybe some of those things that we tabled, we have to come back to now, now that we're getting on the other side of construction. And so that part two discussion, as you can imagine, is a deeper dive around a number of topics that are connected to kind of a 3 year to 5 year planning horizon. We intend to come back to the board later this school year for some additional discussion on those points. In the meantime, we do have some things we do want to talk through on the attached file, and Mr. Hoffman can lead the way, and we'll probably tag team that as we go and address whatever questions come up as we go.
Thank you. At the top of the list, the annual allocations are items that have been on these yearly lists for a number of years now. Capital maintenance, the turf field, and the track replacement. We've gone over those things. If there's any questions on that, you have to answer them. We can move on to the next items, the next topics. Upper Allen roof recoat. If you remember, a few years ago during the project, we elected not to replace the entire roof through value engineering. There was portions of the roof that had some years life left on them. We elected to hold off on replacing those areas, and they have come around to needing a recoat, and we're at that point. And I would say it's probably not quite half of the building. It's more about a third of the building that needs that recoat. And that's where we're at.
I think the maybe in a parallel conversation, I would say the high school is even a recent example of that, where we recoated a large majority of the roof, but there was a section of roof where we still had warranty left. And so by leaving that warranty in place, we can still get some additional years of life out of it. And then we'll come back in a future capital reserve conversation and say, okay, now we need to come back and address that section of roof. And so in a similar way, that's what's happened here at Upper Allen. The estimate will allow us to continue to kind of scope out the project and then think about the timing of it, where we would come back to the board for additional discussion.
And would that generally then put a new warranty into effect out so many years? Or don't they warrant the
Yes,
vehicles?
it'll be a 20-year.
So it would also be a 20-year.
On the portion that gets recoded, yes.
In the 70% that we've done, was it 70? Like you said, this is like a third of the roof. How long ago did we do that? How many years left there?
3 years, probably have, I don't recall if that's a 20 or 25 year, but that's about 3 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of the roof warranties are in the 20 to 25 year range, depending on the project and the building. But
Years ago, we did 15-year recoats. We're at a point now where we like the 20s. They do 25s, they even do 30s now. But
I think it maybe even underlines a little bit of the earlier point about, as we look out from a facilities planning lens, you think about infrastructure, whether that be roofs, you think about mechanical systems. When you're looking ahead, you're really thinking about a lot of these infrastructure items as having 15, 20, 25-year lives. And so how does all that fit into the facilities planning process? And certainly addressing a lot of those things through the construction projects, as one of the 3 buckets is mechanical and infrastructure, but we know that there's still some other needs of the district. And so continue to look at those.
moving on to the next item. Upper Allen has a portion of sewer line that needs some work, and we're still looking into what exactly we'll want to do there, whether it's an entire replacement of that stretch of line or more of a detailed portion replacement and coating the inside in order to save some money doing something a little different. Portions of the line, the bottom of the pipe is deteriorating, cracking. We've had a few issues where we had to bring contractors in to clear the lines. So we're looking at ways to either replace or repair those lines. And the number associated there is more of a repair than full replacement. But there is probably some further discussion that needs to be done there.
It's a section interior or exterior?
Interior.
Interior.
And some of the sewer line gets into, can you or can't you repair it as it sits, line it? There's a question about that. You have to replace it outright. So as we really try to refine the scope, that's something we're going to have to look at closer.
Yes, we're going to need to demo some concrete.
So I'm assuming it's more expensive with it being interior than exterior.
Yes, yeah, and very invasive.
And depending on the extent of it, that's another piece of it too. So at Northside, even we had a similar situation where it started as an estimate at a certain place, and then as we kind of got into it and did replacements, I think the final number was closer to 100 or 110,000. I think was where we landed with that.
That's the one where the pipe was basically gone.
Yeah.
As they uncovered it.
And this wasn't uncovered in the renovations of the building, which were like pretty extensive in Upper Allen, right? Is the pipe in the new or the old area?
This would have been in the old area, the original building. So it wasn't identified as something that needed done. The project is finished, and now we need to rectify it.
Are we having to rip up and replace the floor though?
Tile, but not the concrete itself is not new. So we would have to replace certain parts of the floor tile. And again, that goes into the expenses as well as what degree do you want to replace and what do you want to repair.
So I think to Mrs. Maris's point, there probably is definitely some
Demo of the new
What's that?
stuff, demo of the new stuff.
I would say that the newer stuff is minimal compared to the concrete that would need to be demoed and then new concrete poured, finished.
But that was old concrete
And
from.
that was old concrete, yeah.
Is this anywhere near like the kitchen area again?
No.
How disruptive will this be to school?
It would be very disruptive. We'd have to do it over the summer. Okay.
We're definitely gonna look into possibly a reline.
Yeah.
Which would be much less invasive.
That's an option that we're looking into, trying to get different ideas of what is going to be best long-term, but yeah, we're feeling that's probably a good option for us.
And some of the challenge, at least initially, talking to different contractors, is everyone has a little different opinion on what can or can't happen, and so I think our goal was, we know this is an issue that we want to get in front of. We want to try to get a budget estimate tied to it, and then we'll spend some more time talking to contractors and specialists to say, what is the most appropriate option, what's possible, what's not possible. Because even understanding, as we've gone through it, we've had different opinions. So,
Yeah, I mean, I tend to find, yeah, they really like to just replace that thing.
Well, we don't want to come back in 2 years and have to replace it at that point either.
Right. In some cases, it's necessary. But we'll do our due diligence. Okay, moving on. Next item, this is a replacement boundary fence at the rear of Shepherdstown School, on an adjoining property behind Shepherdstown. So this is a little bit different than a lot of our elementary schools, where the playground sort of runs into this neighboring yard, and it's a downward slope into their yard, wooded, shrubbery and wooded area, and there is an existing fence there. The fence has been a benefit to the school. It is falling apart, and this is a part of a larger project where we're removing some shrubbery, older shrubbery, removing some older trees, redoing some landscaping back there, but the biggest thing is the fence replacement. And we'd like to tear down the old wooden fence and replace it with a vinyl fence.
Was that original fence put up by the schools?
We believe so.
records are a little spotty.
It crosses the boundary a few times, but it's mostly on our side, and talking with the neighbor, they're all for us replacing it. And there's no issues there. I think it will be a benefit, and will look much nicer.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Not a shared cost, though.
Okay. So I guess as a final reminder, we do capital reserve fund as a two-step process. Really the initial view of the allocations, and then we'll come back to the board as we've further scoped out the projects, the possibilities, a final recommendation, and then we would bring that back for kind of a second reading, if you will, at a future meeting. So
But this you'll have on the February meeting for approval.
the initial list for approval, yeah, and then we'll come back one final time as we kind of finalize, some of these things. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roth.
Move on to item 4, curriculum. Item 4.01, high school program update. Mr. Harris.
Yes,
Dr.
we're going to
Landy.
turn this over to Mr. Harris to do what has now become almost an annual presentation to the board around the high school program. And I won't delay, sir. You're up.
Great. So hopefully, depending on how good your memory might be, most of these slides will at least appear to be familiar. I've used many of them before in our recent visits to you, talking about the high school program. Obviously, the ones that have data on them are updated based on current relevant data, and you'll see that as we move into that. So to kind of set the stage here, we'll do a very, very, very quick kind of history reminder. about where we got to the point of developing a vision. And so really we have developed a vision. We've worked to start to bring it to life, but we kind of then use the theme of building towards that vision, which talks about how we've designed the facility and are now just about ready to enter into the first part of the new design facility. And then obviously the living out the vision is the going forward part. So there's again, how did we make the decisions we made? What is the facility starting to look like? But then what are the things we need to be keeping in mind when we look at not just growth of students, but growth of programs, needs of students, in a way that also maximizes the facility, because we didn't build a facility sheerly based on numbers, which would have required certainly many more just pure classrooms than what we did. So I think you'll see it kind of all fit together on each of these three themes. So again, we've used this kind of as our central question, but making sure our program is preparing our students for where they're headed. And obviously we've had a long history of a strong reputation academically that I think precedes all of our times in these roles, and some of you are of course a product of this system. So that's not really the issue. It was more about, is it responding to where we're going? It's very easy to just keep rolling out the same kinds of courses and same kinds of offerings, and we don't move from them quickly either because they are successful. But we know that I don't know that I want to say the pendulum swings, but certainly all kids kind of moving towards maybe one target in terms of what their future holds is not in their best interest. And I think you'll see some data that shows that so many of the options we've put out there for years still is kind of earmarked for maybe a certain type of student, and maybe have some others that we need to be looking at. So again, making sure the program is meeting where they're heading. And so some of you have been parts of the different parts of these. I think if I go all the way back to the first secondary program evaluation about 10 years ago, that we did have several of you as board members were a part of that. We then revisited again in 2017, and out of that became our vision narrative. At about the same time, the feasibility study started to come online. So it was not just about program, it was program and, oh yeah, here comes this growth, and what are we going to do about that? And so that growth, of course, presented us with an opportunity not just to build, but rather to design a build. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then certainly, we saw here in the budget presentation, I think we often look at the changes that happen in our lives over 2 years about, not generally in a positive way, because there's so many things that have had a negative impact, but I think it has created some challenges that have resulted in good solutions that are worth carrying forward. And then it's also created, I think, some opportunities. And I think we've maximized them to an extent, and yet I can't say we've fully maximized them because it's changed, it's new, it's different, and we're not, as humans, wired that way. And certainly when our care is other people's children, right, that's also something that is very important to make sure we move, but do so in a with a degree of caution, or at least of planning and that sort. So the vision, again, something that has been shared with you, but this was our narrative, our written narrative. Did fit on 2 pages, and it was the idea of what can our best self be in 5 to 7 years. And here we sit in 6 years. And I think if we actually broke this document apart and looked at it, I do give it to the new teachers sometimes when they get there in August to say, read this and I'd be curious to hear a little later this fall how you think we're doing here, because they're walking into it as an outsider, don't know where we were, but they can see where we're at. And so curriculum assessment, instruction, obviously those are pieces that are anchored well within so many elements of our district program. But really when we get to the key is, how do we deliver what's in there? When you start to get to modality, time, space, that is really where that delivery comes. And so that has really shaped the decisions we've made, both in terms of the facility, but also looking at programming opportunities for students. So from that vision then, which was worked on by 16 MASH faculty members and myself, we eventually arrived at a steering committee that grew out of the next program evaluation about 5-6 years ago. And that steering committee took the vision and then did a number of different things, including visits to multiple schools, as I have shared before. And from that came up with a really incredible spreadsheet. I don't know if I use the word incredible. We looked at things as, is it aligned to the vision going forward? Does it help combat growth? Is it a new option for kids, but does it put a demand on the facility? Some things put a demand on the facility. We need to change the facility. Others were, hey, if we do this, we don't need as big a facility, or we don't need as many spaces. So went through all of that, and out of that group then further broke down into 3 other focus groups, and then pulled some other staff in, looking at the schedule, looking at blended learning, looking at external programs. And really all 3 of those, believe it or not, are alive and well right now, small scale in some cases, as you'll see in the data in a little bit. But was really interesting. A few different occasions the staff has had a chance to walk into the new addition, but most recently it was at the end of the January faculty meeting, or was it, if not, we had an Act 80 day. It was one of the 2 days in January. And there were 2 teachers who came to me later who were in the 12 on the steering committee, who hadn't had a chance to go in at previous occasions. And they were really happy to share how what they helped contribute eventually ended up in a spreadsheet that was color-coded and shaded with all these keys. They could see the small group rooms. They could see the flexibility in a double lab with a divider between the middle. They could see spaces that we've created that we're not exactly sure what that looks like in 2023. And that's been a challenge for many people involved, myself included, because unfortunately what happens in education, oftentimes not speaking for anything else that has happened in the district because I wasn't involved in that. But I can go back 20 years ago at the high school. If you design it for what you know now, it's quickly parts of it become obsolete, or at least not adaptable. And so that was our goal, was making sure what we've created is, yes, it can house our program now, but it leaves possibilities open going forward 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I feel pretty good about it. So it was really neat to hear a couple of those teachers come back and share that perspective that, wow, what we put in a spreadsheet, we can now see in reality. So
maybe if I could just interject here.
Please.
To Mr. Harris's credit, I know this evening earlier we talked about the 3 buckets around construction, program enrollment, and mechanical infrastructure. And I think to his credit, and you can see it come to life a little bit here, how program took on a big part of what was happening at the high school. And Mr. Harris did a nice job leading that conversation, getting feedback, and then incorporating it ultimately into the project. And so those 3 buckets were intentional, and it really guided the work of where do we see our district heading, but how do we also address our needs. So
excited for you to see it soon. We probably have to get that plan to visit there. So there's some recent pictures from this week. To the left is I'm standing kind of near the WAC, not looking. You can see the overhang a little bit there in that picture. That is the new student entrance, which will come online, as Mr. Kastner pointed out. The plan is for that to start of semester 2, which is Friday, and so you can see the facade there. Inside the middle picture, that is the upstairs commons. There are 2 commons in this building, this wing. The first floor commons is a little more, I'll say, traditional thought of commons, kind of a potential for a student union concept in the middle. So monitors, soft furnishings will be there, places to collaborate, small group rooms. But upstairs is really aligned to the right there, which you can't quite see real well. There are 2 labs that can be merged together, but they also have glass garage doors that can open up, so those classes could move out into that production area where there's power drops and areas of that nature. And so you could see some multidisciplinary pieces there, perhaps physics working with engineering, or maybe a trig class and working with robotics or something like that. So you could be running multiple things in one setting that historically, in the way a building is laid out, well, this department's here, this department's here. This is going to allow for multiple departments to be in one place at a time.
Is this like the tech ed? No?
Not specifically and not exclusively. No, that is a separate area. But there will be some of those courses that could be offered in this area. Yes.
I see the opportunity to have a board meeting up there.
Be a great
Throw it
idea.
out there.
Great idea. To the right-hand side is a science lab, and so that is probably the only lab that we built with one concentration in mind, because we certainly did need certain pieces there in terms of water and venting and things of that nature. You can't kind of, as much as my goal was flexibility, at some point if you're so flexible, you don't have the pieces that you need. So one of these labs did need to be a little bit earmarked specific to some of the needs, particularly of more of the life sciences. So there's a lot more to show and a lot more to share, and even downstairs there's a commons, and downstairs where up here we have the 2 labs that come together, but downstairs there's 2 large group rooms that come together that also create some opportunities from how we not just deliver or design the program, but also how we deliver the program and some other benefits perhaps for the community at large.
Are the students going to use that student entrance starting Friday as well, or are they?
That is correct. Yes. Yep. It's kind of going to be an unofficial grand opening, if you will. So yes. Yeah, I think when you think to the back of that building, if we go way back, some of you can recall there were steel doors on the back there. You couldn't even, there was no light going in that hallway then. He's got some light, and we got some painting, and we eventually put a sign outside, so welcome to Mechanicsburg. That was here we go, and yeah, it seems like, considering a third to half of our students enter from that side every day, I think it's an appropriate way for them to come in and to their new home. I will say, when they come down the sidewalk, we've only built half the plaza because we still have construction doing the other side. And hearing the board's desire not to rip up stuff we've already created, we've only created half the plaza. We've got to wait till the other half to be created till we're done with the heavy renovation on the right side, which is the tech ed area. So.
Fan of that.
What was that?
Big fan of it.
So if there's no pipes there, we don't care.
This is like swing space right now, or this
Yes,
semester,
and
right?
that is difficult for even myself sometimes, and I'm trying to preach it to the staff. How we use it this first semester, how we use it the second semester, and even the third semester a little bit, that's the first 3 semesters it's open, in many cases is not exactly how it was designed. Some places absolutely, but not in all cases, because it is swing space, exactly. Yep. The good news in that is I think it'll get a large variety of kids through there, get just about every staff member through there. That plays in, I think, to a little bit to something else I'll share a little later in the presentation. So again, the idea of building, literally kind of the play on words, but you've got to have the vision, you start to design the program. Fortunate that with our growth and the age of our facility, we got to also begin to modify the facility. And there will be modifications inside the existing building, while not as maybe grand in their appearance as that, but in a few cases will really change the functionality of different parts of the existing building to meet the needs. So then we need to move to, okay, let's start to look at that program that we're moving through. And this is a visual, again, that I've shared probably last year about this time. But that idea, and I certainly will come back to mission, vision, and shared beliefs, but we know we do the program evaluation, we see the growth, we're building the project and looking at how we deliver and what options we have, for all the drawbacks of some things we went through. I think parents, from my experience, are a little more willing to take risks, I'm going to say, with options and opportunities in the schedule and in their child's programming. Sometimes it can be really hard to get new stuff off the ground in the past because it wasn't tried and true and it wasn't known. And we just are pushing a new program right now that we did before the pandemic with HACC, and we got 1 student before, and we have 12 now for something that really doesn't have a lot of street cred just yet, And so again, we can look at those things through multiple lens, but I certainly see those positives. So all those things are influencing not just what is in the program, but again, what we add to the program, and then how we present it to our students. So you haven't seen this picture in a while, but this has not been touched since I last used it with those items on it. But I think it helps you see all the different pieces as we start to talk about this. It's, you can build classrooms and say schedule it. You can, but if you again continue to schedule it the same way, which is what schools tend to do, particularly high schools over the really the last 100 years, then you can just play your numbers game and say, well, then this is what we need. And as opposed to stepping back and saying, what could that look like? And how does that help with all those other pieces? But it does have to be built on that foundation. And so I think that's what's important. I think when I put the data slide up here in just a moment, you can grow things quickly, but who knows if they're good or not? Who knows if they're sustainable or not? Or if you determine they're not good or they're not sustainable, once you say yes and open that door, it's really, really hard to bring that back in and go, you know what, we're not going to do that any longer. We don't see that as a good thing, as a benefit. An example I could give you is dual enrollment. Every school in this country right now is willing to, I think, offer any kid in any school dual enrollment credit. We have no control over that aspect of their education. I'm not saying we won't ever get there where it's, hey, everything goes, but we need to proceed cautiously, and so we're starting to open that up a little bit. Our policy change, which you put through last year, opens it up a little wider than it was before, but that's an example where you don't just kind of throw open everything and see what happens, because sometimes we do that, and again, we don't find that the quality of it is good, or there's negative repercussions that erode some other part of our program that we had no intention of eroding. So that foundation is important when we come back and look at how does this course fit, or how does this program fit, or that sort of thing. But I do also think that top piece, and thanks to the support of this board, particularly how we schedule and some of the different things we're able to bring in, allows us then to look at extending programs and new partnerships. And I do remember many times at different points, Mrs. Mayer saying earlier on her time on the board, make sure we're not slowing down where you're trying to go. And so slowing some things down is part of governance, and there's a reason for it, but not so slow that we can't be responsive, that it takes a generation of high school kids, which is, I know, just 4 years to get something through, but 4 years of kids that miss that thing. So I always keep that in the back of my mind. And sometimes I can't still get it going quick enough, because even from my own perspective, again, you got to make sure it's the right thing. And so there has to be a little bit of space in there, but I know we have the support of this board to look at, hey, can we extend, can we grow, can we bring some new things on? So if you recall, when we really began looking at structuring, this was changed a little bit last time, but the goal was to develop a schedule that considered all of these pieces, and we have developed that schedule. And to give you an example of, I would hope that, I don't want to say the curriculum assessment instruction is easy to see, but that's what we spend most of our time on in professional development. That's what we spend. We hire teachers, we supervise teachers, we develop teachers, they teach students. So that, I think, fits in most of our frame of reference. But an example is when programs come on board, and again, our main partners are Messiah, HAC, and Harrisburg University, and although there are others regionally, and then still others beyond that want to partner with us. But when they bring something on in the not too distant past, if we didn't know about it in March, we couldn't do it the next year. And now someone can come to me in September or October from one of those places with an idea for the end of January, beginning of February, and because every student's schedule changes, we have that possibility of considering that new program, that new option. So that's an example where the student experience can change much quicker than it could previously. They may have picked classes already for the spring, but we can modify that. You can't do that when they're a third of the way through Algebra 2 and they need that credit, and that class isn't going to finish till January. And so when Dr. Delaney had a chance recently to meet with Messiah, when we talked a little bit about that benefit in our schedule, I think that was quite exciting to them. It's helping us right now with an opportunity with HAC, and I think it opens up some opportunities with Harrisburg University too. So again, we come back to the facility. So again, I know your primary responsibility is can we afford it? Okay, yes, we can. Here's what you can do with that. But it's also then designing it and using it to maximize it. And so there are factors that go into that. And if we had the exact same facility, but we ran a full year schedule with six periods a day, it wouldn't be nearly big enough. Even with 7 periods a day, it probably wouldn't be big enough. We might need more staff than we otherwise would need. So that staffing piece plays in there. But also so do those extension programs. And so we're going to use this, we've been using this phrase, and Dr. Delaney's used it a lot over the years, but the customization. I've said for a long time, there's very few high school schedules that are identical. Matter of fact, now that we've added more elective options for kids, I don't know that there are 2 high school student schedules that are identical. And part of that is they can customize it quite a bit, especially as they reach towards their senior year. They have so many options available to them. So these are different areas that come into play. Even now, as I'm sitting here tonight on my laptop, I am actually semester 2 start, so I'm looking for room conflicts. Where do we put 2 classes at the same time? And then I'm also going, I still need a classroom for this program at this time of the day. Can I find that classroom, right? So that's part of my job. But when you sit here and go, okay, you're at 1,390, 1,400 kids, and all of a sudden we are going to be at 16 to 1,700 kids before too long. Well, that, and we are going to have more rooms, because keep in mind, we swung some kids out to the new space, and those rooms are getting renovated. So we are going to have more, but we're also going to have more kids, right? And then depending on the purpose, so it's a puzzle that's not yet complete, and we have to get closer to that high-end number of enrollment, a little further out, maybe about 2 years from now, to be able to go, okay, we've developed something that we know can work within the space we have, but it's our mission, our vision, and our shared beliefs for students. So those are those factors that go in, and that's a lot of my February through August work as a high school principal. But then again, with the semester approach, you're actually hitting it a second time, where we've kind of scheduled those classes in the summer. But you write a lot of checks in August that you don't have to catch till the end of January, and they're all coming due. So we're myself and the assistants are great at helping me trying to figure those puzzle pieces out. So cash those checks, make sure they clear. First bit of data I'll show you. You've definitely seen both of these. The top one is I apologize, I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. It's a little bit older, maybe about a couple years back there. Still from Decision Insight, and the bottom one is the December one that I think Mr. Longwell showed for the whole district just less than 60 days ago. So I'll just point out, though, if you go to 25 at the high school on the top one, you can see a population of 1,571, and so this one was kind of many years ago, and now you go to 25 on the bottom one, which is our conservative numbers, cautious numbers, and you're at 1,537. So you're at quick math, you're about a 30, or not even a 35 student difference, about a 33, 34 student difference. So, we know there's some effects elsewhere in the district that maybe the numbers aren't quite like that, but at the high school numbers, you can see that that they are. And so, when you sit there and look forward a little bit, I think when you get to 2025, we're going to probably be 400 kids above where we were around 2018, 2019 at the high school. But we will be at that point then within striking distance of that high-end number, which I think is still showing to be in that 1,650 to 1,700 mark. So I think that, to me, fall of 25 is the beginning of your first full year in your renovated, added-on building, and your population is now starting to approach, when you're going up 25 kids a class, that's not going to have a huge impact on your schedule when you have classes of 400. But when we went from under 300 to 350 to 400 like that, that's really hard to make that change in your schedule for over 400 freshmen, which is what we have right now. So both in terms of scheduling the staff, because there's other considerations to that too. It's not just do we have enough people. I don't think it's easy anywhere at any level, but I know here, how many preparations do they have? Do they have a certification? Have they taught that before? It's not just 25 go here. And I know I'm oversimplifying that, and I'm not when I say that for any other level, but I know here, we got to kind of look through that so that again, one of the things on that other slide at the very end, but it was teacher experience too. We need to. We've talked about the labor market, right? And we want to hold on to the good ones that we have. And sometimes there's a lot we can't do, but we can make sure that their workload and their schedule is conducive to their most important work. You've seen some version of this before, although the 22-23 numbers are new. And so this is an example when we start to talk about the vision. And what I say, and I just met with the juniors getting ready to build their senior schedule, and we've said this for a number of years, we really want your last year at MASH to look more like where you're going next, less like where you came from. Whereas your first year at MASH looks a little bit more like where you came from. You go from 8th grade to 9th grade, math, science, social studies, English, PE, health, and you have a couple of electives maybe to select from. But by senior year, as you've all known for a long time, in our graduation requirements, it's English, PE, and then some elective choices. And now that kids can take more electives sooner, they can get further into a language, further into the sciences, further into whether it's, one of the fine arts areas. So, but we've also tried to make sure that we create opportunities in many cases beyond our walls. And most of these opportunities, not all of them, but most of these occur outside of the walls of our building, AP, of course, being the primary exception to this. So you can see, I just kind of have, I can't remember the first time we did this for you, but we've done this several times. So I didn't give you the entire aggregate of it, but you can see 14, 15 to the present, along with one stop along the way. And you can see in some cases, we've made tremendous growth, and you can say some of that might be as a result of enrollment. And I would say, yeah, however, keep in mind, our seniors right now are only really just a little bit over 300. So they're not significantly larger than, say, the seniors in 17, 18. We've been in that 280, 320. We've had a big class, the 21 class was probably the biggest up until the current sophomores that we've had in 30 years. So really, in some respects, they've not grown tremendously. But if you remember, we put in the senior alternative, we called it, to kind of encourage seniors to look at these options. And so that really has had a number to do with the push. When you look at dual enrollment, that's a perfect example. I will share with you, the 309 with the star is not 309 students, but it's 309 courses taken. The other thing I will share in there is there are a couple college in the high school. So a college in a high school means you take it at the high school, taught by a high school teacher, but that teacher is approved to give college credit by somebody. So, and the only two this current year we're running that has that is mechanical drawing with HAC, and then AP language composition with Harrisburg University. We've had some others. We have more that we're looking at for next year. Those universities have their own requirements with respect to our teachers. Sometimes for our teachers, I have to get their buy-in because they may have to modify something or do something extra to get that. So that's where that number 309 comes from, and that's why there's an asterisk there. You can see a couple others that have not grown as quickly: the Design Your Own course, the online electives, and I'm going to talk about the new opportunities in a little bit. They've been a little slower to grow. We do need to give them more attention and make them more deliberately available in the eyes of our students. And it requires some management and oversight that we just don't have in place right now. The online electives has an asterisk, though, because, again, as we shared with you in our course selection changes through KILA, and that came out of the blended learning focus group recommendations that were coming together right in March of 2020. We are bringing 12 new online electives through KIOLA to the students. Seniors will be able to choose them if they take 2 in a semester. We're only allowing them to take 3 total, 1.5 credits. We don't want to get bigger too fast. So that's why we're bringing in 12 classes, not 112 classes to pick from. And it's also why we're letting them select a credit and a half. That allows them to put 2 together and make it a major, which does a lot of different things for the student and for the school. But it also, that extra half credit, if they get into something like intro to animation or intro to sports medicine, and they want to take the subsequent class the next semester, that extra half credit allows that to happen. We could come back to you next year with the same courses plus some more, or pull a few out based on what we learned. So I would expect that 9, if I put these numbers before you next year, to be considerably larger. Yes.
Why would we limit our own KIOLA as an option when it's the same district?
Right. Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One is we found, for some of our students, we have found that asynchronous, completely independent online learning with no teacher support to not be a successful avenue. And so unless I sit there and say, no, you can't take it because I don't think you'll do it, I don't really, as long as you've passed your classes. Well, a 76 in the building with a teacher is very different than, here you go. And I really worry about seniors who suddenly aren't going to make it to the stage in June because they took a chance that they maybe weren't prepared for. I think the second thing to it, too, is we do feel good about some of the things we developed ourselves in the building. And so I'm not sure the academic rigor of all of these courses. So to have a kid take a number of different ones, And then we find out, well, gee, that was really easy, or really hard, and they don't graduate, or they're not prepared when they get to their next academic stop, because we didn't select things where, we know there's not a heavy interactive piece in the Keola electives. We selected topics that we know we can't deliver. So for example, I think there were a number of environmental pieces, or cybersecurity was another example. So just a way to get a taste. I think as we learn more, we might go, what, we're being a little conservative here. We need to open this up. We'll be able to study the success rates after a year and go, what, those were the right courses. So those are some of the reasons why. I have a few more, but.
Do you have to have a certain number of people sign up for any
So
of those courses?
that is the nice flip side of it. No, you don't, right? Whereas in the building, if I get numbers that drift down low, I go, well, we're not offering that. But then I got 8 kids who really want that and can't get it, right? So that's why I have to be careful, this balance, because if it's really new and it's really different and they're really into less structure and less accountability. And that doesn't mean they aren't good students. It doesn't mean those aren't good classes. But we do offer a distance PE right now. Well, we believe the kids were trying to get in. We're going, well, if you have not passed all your PE, you haven't passed it when you had somebody next to you. We can't put you in an experience where it's all on you. So, I think we did learn that through the pandemic, and that's where we did see a number of folks who did say that worked for that year, but that didn't work for us, and we want to come back. So
I get it, and I understand the difference between an elective in college and an elective here, where we have guidance for a reason. So that makes sense.
I added the bold words workforce development because I think we've always had CTC, previously known as VOTEC. I worked co-op for a long time, but I think there are a tremendous number of opportunities here in my work, particularly with HAC and Harrisburg University. They both offer a wide array of certificates that our students could possibly earn while in high school, and probably under the guise of dual enrollment. But we don't have a vehicle right now to do that, right? Right now, it's you take a college course or you take these other courses. And so I put the star there. The HAC came to us probably about 5 years ago with the HAC STEP program, which is, it's a stepping stone out, hence the name. I do think they have an acronym for the STEP. But in essence, these students will get OSHA certification. They'll do the Keys to Work certification, which can help them with the Act 158 grad requirement. They'll get CPR. They'll continue to get job exploration pieces like mock interviews, could lead to some pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship kinds of things. They will pick up 3 HAC credits, so if they would go back to HAC as a student at any point, it would fulfill their freshman seminar requirement. But the goal in this is not to get these kids to come back to HAC full-time right away. They can if they want to, but it is kids who are probably headed to the workforce but don't know what they want to do or why they want to do it. They just know these other doors don't seem to be the right doors for them. And the kids we're looking at aren't at the VOTEC, because those students we know they have a path to work, they have a trade, they have certification. So it's a population of students, if you look at the top, most of those are geared towards academically oriented kids or higher ed oriented kids. And we just know that that's not the answer for everyone. Why our CTC numbers have gone up. We did ask to have our number increase. They did increase it. Some of our kids got waitlisted for the shop they wanted to be in, or else our number would be higher than 96 this year. So the message is out there. Kids and families are looking for those things. But you go to Harrisburg University and they're going to offer CNA certification. All right, but I got to figure out how to put that. They don't. You take it online with them, and there's a liaison, but we need somebody back at the home base to monitor that, to track that, to help them when it's time to get to the field experience piece of that and figure those out. So I think that bottom half has a tremendous number of possibilities that we are just starting to learn about. And again, Dr. Lee and I for many years have talked to Harrisburg or heard from HAC, and they have these things. And some of them are geared towards post-high school students where they have the transportation, the time, but we know they're looking to go down to the 17, 18-year-olds because we can't fill all the positions that are out there, and we can get our younger students, or our younger adults, I should say, our older students ready for that. There's some piece there. So this becomes part of that. And I will point out that many of these things also do alleviate the need to build a high school that holds 1,650 kids for 7 hours a day, which is what senior year looked like not all that long ago. That is not our primary reason. You got to come back again to mission, vision, and beliefs. If you're just doing it for the capacity piece, then we're probably not doing right by kids.
How do we put skulls around these things? And I don't mean that like each one of them deserves a goal, but how do we, we have resources to develop these things, and you're talking about limitations of resources to add new dual enrollment college or whatever, or have teachers be certified to teach college and high school. But if we think that there's value for students, maybe that's a thing to do. How can we be intentional with this as a system?
I was looking at that real quickly, and we haven't even talked about this, so I'm not sure my math is right. If you add up that column, there's about 1,000 courses represented there. If an average student is at 4 courses, you're talking about 250 kids that's represented up there if you went with a traditional model, right? Well, 250 kids, you got to say that's about 10 staff and at least 6 to 7 classrooms, right? So back to your question about goals, I think what this board has given us over the years is the flexibility to come back to you and say, here's a different approach that we want to take to staffing, or here's a different approach that we want to take to a program outside, but we're still serving these kids in a way, we still have to serve these kids, these 250 kids. So I would say that continuing to allow us to explore what those external programs look like, what the non-traditional programs look like. I hesitate to put a number on it because I'm concerned that then once you set the number as a benchmark, you tend to push kids in a direction. I would rather open it up as opportunities for kids to self-select where they want to go with these things, as opposed to saying, we need 100 kids in CTC next year. Well, based on what? Like, what are you using as a measure to come up with that? So my answer would be it's really about the board continuing to give us the flexibility to look at how do we increase options for kids
Naturally.
by their choice.
Yeah, and I think a lot is that. I mean, I think fairness to parents are very much. I mean, the fact that we had 140 kids at some point in the process to apply to Cumberland Perry that last year, or I should say 140. We had 70 returning, and then we had 70 apply. So our number at one point was 140, and that's why we got our number increased, and we did see a jump there in the number who got in. You look to the right too. There was a time the counselors could manage those numbers in 14, 15. Like even now, I go to the counselor, I say, okay, I need every junior and senior you think fits this prototype. I brought 2 in who were alpha now, but they were the junior, sophomore last year, I guess. Yeah. I said, you know these kids best. Listen to this program, which we had heard about 5 years ago, had 1 student in. They loved her and actually used her as an example in our presentation. It was the only kid we could get in it. And we had parents show up for the meeting. We didn't even invite them. We emailed them, so they knew we were inviting their children, but they were like, this sounds good. And so, that was an avenue that we knew that our schedule allowed. This opportunity falls under dual enrollment by the definition of the college credits. So, but there are things I've talked recently with some other school districts when I listened to Harrisburg or HAC, and I'd heard Red Lion High School, for example. So I talked to their college and careers counselor, and she's like, well, here's how we do these workforce things. We tie them into our internships, but that's how we house it and manage it, but we do. So I'm trying to figure out those different ways. We're not the only one in this game right now, and there's a lot of good things happening. So I try to be resourceful and use the contacts I have to learn, because I think just like we went out and learned from other schools about how to schedule our program, I think we go out to other schools and learn how are they servicing kids that maybe we feel we're not servicing as well, or providing opportunities as well. So
I think I hear what you're both saying. I know that not all of these deserve it, and gold isn't even the right word, but like putting these numbers up here is like, it's interesting, but the story's different for each one, right? Like, oh, we had a lot of enrollment. Well, that's not reflected in AP growth, right? If you match that up against student growth, the CTC growth isn't matched up against that, and so I hear what you're saying. Like, we shouldn't push people artificially. But if we said in 14, 15, we have enough kids going to the CTC, like, no, we don't. Like, we have more in the quota. And same with AP, like, I don't even know if that's the right answer. You know, you read about whether AP is the right thing for kids to do, and then the barriers to entry for courses and all that. So I don't know. And I wonder, as the member of the public saying, are we doing the right thing over time? Are we spending more resources and whatever on AP when we should be focusing on more kids going to co-op? Or those are two different classes of students, right? One going to college and one not. Are we, how are we, I don't know how to measure whether the high school program is serving those students based on this, and that maybe this is the bigger question of the how do we measure how do we measure the performance of our graduates and the undertaking? Yeah, I can't think of the program we're undertaking with that right now, but that all kind of ties into this. How do we know if this is successful? I don't know.
Secretary, to your point, I think people tend to vote with their feet, and so the enrollment is up, and you're right, AP is not, but dual enrollment is. I think kids have found, and the word is out there, that AP is not necessarily the only answer, or even the best answer. It may be for some kids, and we're finding more and more kids. I mean, when we look at our number of kids going to Messiah right now, and those credits are almost guaranteed to transfer, whereas the AP scores, it comes back again to the test, and will the colleges accept it? So I think they help us start to recalibrate some of that sometimes by their choices and their decisions. And so, yeah, I will be straight up and say, it's not easy in the building for me to be, and I know you didn't say this, but for me to, AP's got its strong following of parents, teachers, and consumers out there, even including the College Board itself. And so, I agree. I've worked hard, and I know this is not exactly so, but sometimes that is the tail that wags the dog, and it isn't always the answer. And it could be something else could be the tail that wags the dog. And I think that's back to that idea of let's put this array out here. Let's get that out there and let the kids and families be able to kind of pick for themselves, as opposed to saying, hey, we don't need as much dual enrollment in our college and high school because we have AP or because we have this. So
I think it's a long-standing tradition in this district. I remember I came here 20 years ago as high school principal, and I said, okay, so how do we do this master schedule? And the answer was, well, it's based on students' selections. I'm like, no. Like, I'm the building principal. I have to set up a master schedule. How do I do that? It's based on what the kids select. And I'm like, this is a high school. Are you kidding me? That's been in place for probably 30 years, if not longer, in this district, that you say vote with your feet. The kids tell us. I think our obligation is to offer them the opportunities and let parents and kids say, this is what I want to do with that. And I'm real hesitant to say I want to see our AP numbers go to a certain level, or even our CTC numbers to go to a certain level. I would be much more receptive to this idea of let the kids tell us. Our job is to offer those opportunities and make them high quality opportunities, which I think goes back to your question about, well, why not just open the catalog to Keola? Because our job is to make sure that they're all quality and good opportunities for kids. So I hear you though. Believe me.
I kind of feel like, it's not our goal to increase the AP course number, but yet percentage, how many percentage of the kids, is it 25, 50% of the kids are taking one of these options? I think that's, the more that grows, the more we've done our job.
Well,
offering more offerings and more choices to kids that they really want, and not just one of them. But I mean, like, do you have an idea how many
different students are involved in? Well, and that's where it's difficult. For example, some of these are just primarily senior opportunities, but obviously CTC starts in 10th grade. Right? We do have starting next year AP course that you could have in 9th grade, right? So it's really hard. So your AP numbers could look drastically different, next year this time, because we've got 9th graders in there along, which we never had before in an AP, or if we added an AP class that suddenly more kids were taking. So you do have to be careful with numbers, but I think where we come back to is, like I've even gone so far as right now, if you select one of these and you're a senior, you can have a flexible schedule. Don't have to stay for lunch, don't have to stay for study halls, and if you have enough credits to graduate, you don't have to have a full schedule. But at some point, I think we need to be saying, you must be in one of these to start to customize. But we can't do that until we have enough options for all types of students, because right now we don't have enough for certain types of students who again, we're, and that's not a knock against anything we have there. We just need to continue to add to the options and opportunities that we have.
And if you had a class of 400 seniors, how many do you think of that percentage is taking advantage of something?
Yeah, I think you're probably approaching half, I think, in most cases. And, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds. You got a portion of kids who do need to be in the building for everything for some obvious reasons, but that should be a small percentage. It should not be a very large percentage. So I think there's a gap between that half, though, and that small percentage that we haven't had a whole lot to offer them over the years. And I don't think that's unique to Mechanicsburg, but I think our higher ed partners, their business model has changed. We're the consumer. We're in a driver's seat that we've never been in before, and it's not just traditional academic slots. They are open to some things that maybe they weren't open to 5 years ago. So we've got to find a way to capitalize on that.
Can you remind me, like, if a student went to Messiah for a class, do they pay for that or do we?
So they pay for that. We do, through the foundation, and have an EITC grant, so they're allowed to apply for a scholarship for. I think we're doing $100 a course. So if a kid takes 3 courses, they can get $300. And if a student is going to Messiah, for example, those courses at the dual enrollment rate are much less than they are at the freshman rate. Thanks to the policy we changed last year, if a student in the fall is accepted to a higher ed in the spring, they want to take online courses at Penn State, if Penn State would let them, or Westchester, or pick your school, they could take dual enrollment courses now for the school they're matriculating to in the spring from and get high school credit for it. So that's very new. This is really the first time we're kind of dipping our toe into that water. And again, it's another one of those, you're nervous to dip it. It's easy to go over to Messiah and say, what's this experience looking like? Or over to Harrisburg University, but when we open it up, and you can't just say, well, we don't know your school that well. You can't do it. That just isn't going to fly. So we're taking that first step here.
So to me, the success is the higher percentage of kids that are taking a different opportunity, that we have a list of to choose from is better.
Yeah, if you're in our school after 13 years, right, and hopefully in that 13th year we can create something that is beyond a classroom, not entirely beyond the classroom. We need the classroom, but we have a lot of 17, 18-year-olds who are picking class X, Y, or Z because it sounds good and I have to take a schedule, but is it really, what's it opening up for them?
I appreciate the focus you have on trying to ensure that all of these are high quality. I mean, I think that is something that you can do that's more measurable. Like when you raise some of the reservations about some of the online classes, well, I'm not totally sure what quality some of those are, but I think, I know just from the internships, we have a number of kids that have done those at our church, and some from multiple schools, and none of the other schools have the follow-up ongoing. Like some of them, the kid shows up, we never hear from the school the whole semester. In Mechanicsburg, somebody comes and checks out the site, there's interaction. So I think that's the kind of quality, quality control, if you will. And anecdotal only goes so far, but anecdotal tells us a lot when we hear kids from CTC talking about their experience. My daughter, who's at Messiah this year as a freshman ed, I think she experienced 3 of these probably her last year: internship, AP course, dual enrollment. And not only were those really good educational experiences, but they also saved us significant money, in her college experience, getting a dual enrollment class for, 20% of the cost of what she paid at Messiah. The internship, she talked with other students who said, I never got in a classroom, but I was a junior in high school. And you were in a classroom as a senior in high school for a whole semester. So I think there's a lot of good, real positives, and I would encourage us to continue to put energy toward making sure that those are all high quality options.
It's interesting, the accountability to that, and I love that you referenced benefits-based accountability, because we have not looked at accountability for this through benefits-based approach. But everything you just said would marry beautifully to that kind of look at What are the results? What evidence do you have that you're getting those results, and how do you plan to get better in certain areas? I think that's between two comments there, I think that's something that we absolutely could go back and look at from an accountability standpoint.
And if there's a way to help parents and students understand, maybe what some of those options are and how they fit.
It's a benefit.
Do they know that internships are available? Do they know
Right.
full enrollment? So, yeah,
I think their input would be key, even if it's a 17 or 18-year-old, I know how I pick classes. It's not how my mom would pick for me, and I think she would have been right, so, anyway.
yeah.
So I think we're just kind of coming to a close here. So, we developed the vision, we've built the vision, and now is that next piece. And so how do we continue to bring it to life? We've used this word, the word here, approach, appears twice, but that's really looking at the customization along with the flexibility and keeping the vision in mind. And so, what are the demands of the facility? We need to continue to see the development of the facility through. But like even now, it sounds funny, and I'm sure they had to do this at the elementary school, but because you said we're using it as swing space, I had to take somebody to go through and label every piece of furniture, because I can't promise it's going to stay where it's supposed to by June. I got to get it back there for next fall, right? Which once you move in, you go, here it is, and most people are possessive and territorial enough. They'll watch their stuff. It's not their stuff, and I needed to stay in the same locations, right? So how we schedule it. Part of that though also is, when you go to the second floor and you look out to the second floor in the other part of the building, it's 2 blocks away, right? So how do we schedule the building with staff so that we don't have a splintered staff? We want a collaborative faculty. We know we have ideas of how to schedule the kids so that they're not doing back and forth, but that's not the same as the staff. So we want to continue to alleviate and offset facility needs. I'm sure somebody's heard somewhere one of these buildings is not big enough already, that just got finished in the last year, or we're out of space already. So we've got to continue to not just think, well, we have more room, we can add more programs. No, we've got to look beyond our walls sometimes for some of the programs we're adding. So that last piece really is making sure that we come back to the foundation when we make the decisions. Is what's that decision grounded in? Does it fit our mission, vision, our beliefs, our purpose? And so this is what I actually share with the faculty as I talk to them just about midway as we're getting ready, because I'm challenging them. They may not have a room that is theirs to put their tent stakes down in for the rest of their career like they've had up to this point, because we want to maximize the facility and we want to use maybe every room, every period. You think it's a birthright to have your planning in your room, and there's tremendous benefits to have your planning in your room. But that's not, you can have your planning in a lot of places. There's only so many places we can put 20 kids or 25 kids for what they need. So trying to push them, some other areas, we've worked with the experts from the architecture firm who've designed many schools to outside sources we contacted to design an area that does not look exactly like the comforts of where they came from, trying to anticipate what's coming. And so we have to continue to lead them through that in the facility. And then obviously, as I said, the making sure that the staff remains collaborative and close. So that's where we're at right now. It's an exciting time. We will, matter of fact, we keep catching kids now that the temporary doors are ripped down, the kids are now sneaking into the new addition to see it, which is a good thing, except we don't want them there just yet. We chased a few out here about 5 o'clock tonight. We do have, there's places that are ready to be used as we speak very easily, and a few little loose ends, as I'm sure you experience on every other program. So
does that include that little cafeteria by the door?
It is, except labor supply for food service limits what we can use that for right now, although we're going to run our Life Skills coffee service out of there, since Life Skills is losing their room for the renovation right now. So we will be using it, and yet not exactly how we designed it this semester. So yep.
That's cool.
And they're changing their model because the way the school day works, and even the student day and then the teacher day, they don't get the walk-up business they got before. So they want to sell to students now, so that the life skill students can get more interaction and making change and more customers. So I've got to weigh in on whether we're going to do that or not. So when I push change, they push back to me, not against the change, but with, oh, okay, some of their own ideas. So it's a great idea, and so we've got to work through that. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. That's a fine report as always, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm only keeping you from 2 policies, I think, too, so I didn't want to.
All right, we'll move on to item 7, policy, item 7.01. First reading of revised board policy 218, student discipline. And item 7.02, first reading of revised board policy 227, controlled substances paraphernalia. They are tied together. That's why I read them at the same time. Dr. Leidy.
My intro is Mr. Bitts. Thank you, Dr. Leidy. Yes, they are tied together. Both of them, the changes and the substance of them have to do with student discipline. And we'll start there with policy 218. The crux of the changes is really having to do with the section there on and off-campus activities and what is the scope of student behaviors that we as a school district have the ability to assign some sort of a disciplinary consequence or take disciplinary action for. And really this comes as recommendations not only from PSBA but heavily from our solicitor. For those of you that have come to different stock leader presentations over the last year or so or heard them, you know that there's been some pretty significant case law in student discipline, particularly around off-campus activities. The biggest case being one that went all the way to the Supreme Court, which was Mahanoy School District versus BL. And really the crux of that case and the changes then to the policy is talking about what is the standard at which there would be what we traditionally had called a nexus to the school district. That language isn't in the policy anymore. It was previously. You might see it in red there. But the nexus is the idea of if something happens off campus between students in our school, what connection is there between that event and the school district? So very little nexus, for example, might be if one student texts another student tonight and says, I'm going to beat you up. There's really no nexus there to the school district in that case. Now, if they text the other student and say, I'm going to beat you up tomorrow after first period, I'm going to meet you in the hallway outside of your English class, there's a different level of connection there that the school district could potentially get involved. So again, when we talk about the impact of this case and the changes to the policy, it's really looking at what that standard is, the point at which we can really get involved from a school official disciplinary standpoint and assign consequences. One of the big changes there in the what was 6 statements that are currently crossed out in red and the new 5 statements in green is also that there used to be opportunity for an extracurricular code of conduct, basically applying a higher standard, if you will, to our students that are participating in extracurricular activities. That's something that through the Mahanoy case and other case law is a little bit under question still. So it's something that we'll continue to investigate with our solicitor, but it's not specifically spelled out in our policy under the policy changes to 218 because of the question marks as to whether that higher standard can still be applied to students just because they're involved in extracurricular activities. 227, the change there is really just to mirror those statements. So the 5 statements now that appear in policy 218 are mirrored there in policy 227, just more specific to controlled substances and paraphernalia.
Yeah, and to Mr. Bitts' point, not only did PSBA come out with these recommendations, but we spent, I'd say, as much time with our solicitor on this as we have any policy in recent memory. Just working through, there's so many scenarios, and I will tell you that even though it's in language here, there's still a lot of questions about how we apply this, and especially those of us who have done this for a while, it's going to shake us up a little bit. But there'll still be accountability for behavior.
Any further questions on policy 701 or 702? And we'll move them forward to February. So Reed?
I'm fine with the policy, but I had a question about how do we, I understand what you're saying about the question mark about how does it apply to extracurriculars, but how does this get conveyed to, say, athletic coaches and people who aren't reading the policy manual all the time so that they're current, and especially, like you said, people who've been doing it for 20 years and now something's slightly different?
So oftentimes what will happen once the board approves a policy, we will put it out to the individuals that are directly impacted if there's that kind of direct impact. In this case, very similar to what we did, we actually brought Gareth in to talk to the administrative team before we ever brought it forward because we wanted to make sure we had a better understanding of it. There's no doubt, especially around like the athletic department, Seth will be part of that, Mr. Panic will be part of that, and we'll talk through those kinds of things with him, and then he'll convey it out to coaches.
Thanks.
Further questions? Meeting adjourned, and we will continue the executive session here. Have a good evening. Everybody needs a quick break.